to make sure that everybody is remembering mobile phones, please, on silent, preferably turned off completely during the meeting. The sign-in sheet is being done by Mark, so you don't need to worry about signing yourself in and signing yourself out, although, or at least signing yourself out anyway. There are no fire alarms planned, so if there is an alarm sounding, you must take it as a real one, and please make your way out of the room, follow everybody else as they move round out through the exit and our evacuation point, which is just on Southern Hay Green at the Blitz Tree, clear of the buildings here. I must remind all our committee members and speakers to please remain focused on the topic that is being discussed. Questions should be direct and specific to the item of business being discussed. Please avoid repetition and particularly repeating items which have already been discussed and covered by other members of the committee. And in order to ensure that everyone has a chance, I shall be strictly sticking to the one bite of the cherry principle at each section. So please make sure that you have your little notes in front of you. I will accept multiple points, but please try and keep to the point. Please respect each other, and please respect the position of the chair. Now declaring this meeting open, and we shall move to agenda item 1, which is apologies. I haven't received any formal apologies, but I note that Councillor Hughes is absent. The minutes of the previous meeting. The previous meeting was on the 20th. That's this one. Well, on the 16th here in front of me in this folder here, yes, on the 16th. So members who were present then, I hope we've had a chance to read through those. Does anybody have any questions of accuracy in those minutes? In that case, I ask for a show of hands from those present to accept those into the record.
That's almost unanimous, Chair, so that has been carried.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. So councillors are reminded of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest that relates to the business on the agenda. I have not had any indications of conflicts of interest, and I'm not seeing anybody wishing to raise any now, so that's been covered. Part 2, there is no expectation of any items to move into part 2, and therefore to have to exclude the press and public. So I welcome the press and public here, and hope you enjoy this meeting. I will remind members of this committee that is possibly the largest and most complex application that we've had before us, certainly in my time here, and I understand going back some 17 or 18 years. So I am looking forward to your full attention, and we shall start as we usually do with this, with our officers' report and recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. So just to draw committee's attention to, there is an additional information sheet. It covers a number of matters. Further correspondence received from ward councillors Moore and Reid, speaking tonight. Further correspondence from Devon County Council regarding flood risk and drainage, confirmed their objection on those grounds is withdrawn. Regarding extra housing, which is not part of the application, they look forward to working with us on the emerging policy and with regards Water Lane as that comes forward, and regards some tweaks to condition 39 in the agenda regarding waste planning. So the tweaks are in bold. There's further representation from the NHS RDUH Trust, which is circulated with the update sheet and responded to in the additional information sheet. There's a condition 6. There's a minor amendment to another condition which is referenced in that by number to correct that referencing, and clarification on the construction method statement, condition 16, to make sure that's explicitly referring to demolition as well as construction, and an additional condition 68 to separate out the Gables Wharf, the management and maintenance of that space in the future, and give that its own specific condition separate from other public or communal spaces. There's a clarification on Section 106 contributions to make sure the education ones are expressed in a per dwelling form. In the actual committee report, it's the grand total only that was reported there. Further to the additional information sheet of additional correspondence being received from the Civic Society, which has been circulated to councillors, and they're speaking this evening, for environmental health to sort of flesh out the concerns on contaminated land, air quality and noise, and contentment that those are dealt with by the recommended conditions. And one more representation from a member of the public concerned with traffic congestion as a result of the development, particularly on Alphington Road. So to move on to the presentation of the application. It's an application on land at Water Lane covering over 6 hectares. It's made an outline with that matters of access only being approved. There's an EIA development accompanied by an environmental statement for up to 980 dwellings, the loss of 4 existing dwellings, and up to 40,000 square metres of commercial, hotel, education, and commercial and community floor space. It's been amended since it was first submitted in August 2023, reconsulted on in May 2024. So the application site outlined in red. At the northern end of the site, it includes Tan Lane and its junction with Water Lane. It includes the Tan Lane underpasses that links through to Exton Road. The site then links down through a sliver of land, former railway land, that rises up to an area behind the electricity box supply point before expanding out back to Water Lane and following the remainder of the site down behind the existing Gabriel's Wharf development and Copfield Street to join the canal, and it goes as far as the gas peaking plant at the southern end of the site, and is bounded by the railway to the east. So we have some maps we may need to refer to or may use later, but just to zoom in and show the extent of that. So it includes the Water Lane, Tan Lane, Willets Lane junction. It includes the social club on the north side of Water Lane. What's the land currently occupied by the Colas between Tan Lane and the former railway line. Extends through the 2 underpasses you can see in photographs through Tan Lane, through the traffic restricted section through onto Exton Road. So then the site, the electricity bulk supply point, is at the top of the picture there. You can see Copfield Street and the Gabriel's Wharf housing development. On the right, join the canal. The site is the area of land between Water Lane and the railway line. On the southern end of the site, the second image, the J.L. Thomas plant, people will know, that extends down to where the gas peaking plant is at the bottom of this map. A review of the site. The land is previously developed. It is industrial land, some of which is occupied, some of which is now vacant or becoming vacant for the purpose of redevelopment. The north end of the site, Colas, is still occupied, and there are 4 flats on the Water Lane frontage. On the other side is the social club, which is also still in use. Some photographs around the sites. This is looking down Water Lane towards Tan Lane. Water Lane follows that junction round to the left. You have the Castings House, which is the 4 flats which are proposed to be demolished, and the Colas blue building behind that. You can see housing development around that junction, 3-storey around the junction, but predominantly 2-storey beyond that. Looking the other way, looking down Water Lane, both buildings left and right of the road here are within the application site. You can see the land levels rise slightly in the middle ground, where the railway line would have gone across from the quayside, across Water Lane, rising up to join the main line, and also going down to go under it. This is currently a pinch point, so in a flood situation, this would be a barrier to flood water passing through Water Lane and cause water to rise up deeper at the point we're looking at. Looking down Tan Lane towards the underpasses, housing on the right, 2-storey, and beyond that there's an industrial set of units. So this is closer to the Tan Lane underpass. The site is on the left. the area of industrial land on the right is outside the site. We have the restriction and the traffic light controlled underpass and the railway line. This is looking back the other way. And then this photographs, you can see the underpass that is in use, that is restricted, but also the unused underpass on the right. Looking the other way, we look along Tan Lane towards Exeter Road. We have the restricted highway and also a raised footpath. Council depot on the left for recycling. Looking through that, you can see the site beyond. The sort of low-rise warehouse unit is on the site. See all that. We keep going down Exton Road into Marsh Barton. We look back down the pedestrian cycle route, which goes under the railway line into the site. There's a double dog leg for that to get through to an underpass, to a low underpass, and that's accessing the site. Further along Marsh Barton, we look through the PACX site. You can see the warehouse building, which is the J.L. Thomas building, or second in sight, on the other side of the railway line. So the railway line is in the middle ground there. Going round onto the other side, onto the canal bank. This is the bottom end of the site. On the left-hand side, you can sort of make out a grey fence, which is the gas peaking plant. Talk about in terms of air quality, noise. The site is then in the middle ground of this picture. Moving further along, we've got industrial units on the left-hand side, which is part of the site. And the site includes the Gables Wharf area, and you can see boats tied up on the canal. You can see the residential development, Gables Wharf. Beyond that, 3 stories, 4 stories, and 4.5 stories for that residential. And at that point, we also look back at the cyclo pedestrian route that cuts through the site and goes under the narrow underpass. From this side, it is cranked, so you can't see the underpass from this point. Within the site, looking outwards, you can see the Gables Wharf housing development on the left there, and sheds that are supposed to be demolished in the foreground of the picture. This is the end of Water Lane where the highway stops. To the break of the tarmac where the end of the public highway is. This section is owned by the City Council beyond this and onto the canal bank. You can see in the middle of the shop the tall shed at the end of Copfield Street, proposed demolition. The former bungalow, which is in commercial use, the middle ground is also proposed demolition. Moving along Water Lane and looking back, you can see the bungalow in the middle ground and the site to the right, the commercial site. Part of the application site. Just looking down Copfield Street towards the large warehouse at the end of Copfield Street, which you can see from the other side of the railway line from Marsh Barton. This is part of the application site proposed for demolition, and on the right hand side of that is the electricity box supply point. And looking back towards the junction of Tan Lane and Water Lane, Castings House here on the left, brick building, and the social club on the right, you can see housing beyond 3 stories, and then dropping down to 2 stories, and the render building on the left here is not part of the application site. Within the application site, the colas, you can see on the left-hand side the rail line curves up to join the former railway line curves up. The land rises to join the existing railway line level, mainline railway line level, and in the centre you can see how the former railway line, which went to the quayside, drops down underneath the mainline railway line. That's a disused archway which will be brought back into use by the application. That's a closer up look at that. You can just see the height restriction and the hatchings on the right hand side, which is the underpass that is in use. This is where within the site where the former railway line, the quayside, would have been raised up to join the mainline level. And if we look around the other way, you can see a significant extent of former railway land that is level, hard standing. And you can see the large building on the left, which is the warehouse at the end of Copfield Street on Water Lane. This is looking from the same position, but looking across the railway lines, you can see into Marsh Barton, see some of the waste processing activities that go on there, which are noise generators, which we'll talk about later. Shots further back from the site, this is near the locks, the canal locks. Looking towards the site, you've got Gibbous Wharf housing development on the right-hand side, wharf beyond, and you can see the chimney on beyond the housing is part of the application site. You can see the black poplars on the canal side that follow on from the housing development there. Close up look, you can see the J.L. Thomas second site chimney, which we just saw, and the black poplars on the canal frontage. Further back from the Valley Park, you can see the chimney in the middle ground there, housing on the right, the lower rise commercial sheds, which are on the application site, and where that chimney is, the slightly taller J.L. Thomas second site, hidden behind the trees in that view. This is a view from the highway, looking across the open space private open space by Collison Crescent, looking back towards the site, which is in the middle of this view. You can see that housing at Haven Banks, but also further down at What's Lane, see the gas would have been the gasometer site in the middle ground of this site, with the application site beyond. Just a quick look at planning policy. The site is allocated for redevelopment as part of a water lane regeneration area. Core strategy in the first Exeter local plan first review. It has also been subject to the supplementary planning document, a development framework and design code adopted last year. This postdates the submission of the application in August 2023 and gives detailed guidance for bringing forward development in Water Lane. Just a few extracts to look at land use. So the application site predominantly forms part of residential yellow development and forms about just over 40% of the Water Lane developable area. It also includes Gables Wharf, which you can see is water spaces and a space on the canal. Access is that's been determined, and this is the active travel plan for the Water Lane area, identifying the E numbers, which are the cycle routes, and also a link to it to the E15, which goes through the underpass, which we looked at in the photographs. It also identifies opportunity for a canal bridge as part of the wider area. It's not part of the application site, but those are the two purple circles identified. So to give better access towards the city centre, towards the hospital, towards employment areas across the River Valley. So vehicular access plan shows the intended vehicular access route adopted from Water Lane through straight across the junction of Water Lane into Tan Lane, and then a new access point which comes into the application site from Tan Lane, uses the rising ground we've seen in the photographs, and has a new access route along parallel to the railway line with vehicular access coming into the site from the railway line side. And a public transport route utilising that same new route parallel to the railway line called Foundry Lane, and allowing buses to circulate back onto Water Lane. SPD includes plans guiding on building heights, locations for 4, 5 and 6 stories, with occasional 8 stories and 9 stories on land further back, chasing the railway line, and at the southern end of the site up to 9 stories. It's a regulating plan which draws together lots of different plans within the SPD. Yellow land, which is predominantly application site, it's residential land in that. You can see the access routes, both vehicular and Foundry Lane, but also the future canal crossing, which is planned as part of a wider Water Lane development, improvements to the route under the railway line. So the application is an outline planning application. It's a demolition of buildings on the site, a mixed-use residential-led development. It is an outline, with access being the only matter which approval is sought at this stage. That's enshrined in the conditions. So the first condition establishes what are the reserved matters. So with reserved matters, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, those are all matters not being considered at this stage. Parameters plans, 6 of them have been submitted with the application. And those parameters plans limit the scope of the application. Means of access is submitted in detail for approval at this stage, along with the principle of development. Development proposes up to 980 dwellings in flatted form, before being lost to demolition, and up to 320 bed spaces of purpose-built student accommodation, and up to 40,000 square metres of commercial, community, and hotel floor space. The application is supported by a lot of detailed information dealing with lots of detail. And some of the information is attached then to the planning application, 3 conditions. So the parameters plans, the 6 of them are specifically attached to planning permission, either recommended or would be attached to planning permission granted by condition 3. Condition 4 then details another suite of documents, the access details, and condition 5 links various supporting documents, designers access statement, landscape, visual appraisal, transport assessments, and so on to the planning permission. This is the first parameter plan, so this sets out which buildings are being approved for demolition, which are almost all the buildings on the site. It identifies the railway lines, some of which are still in place in the ground at the Colas site. There's something to be repurposed within the development, given the history of railway lines crossing the site, and to link back into that history. This is the access parameter plan. It sets out the principal point of access to the site, the primary roads in dark blue, residential access roads in light blue, and green pedestrian cycle priority streets. You see the main access comes in from Tan Lane, circulates down the site, parallel to the railway line. So building heights parameter plan, establish maximum building heights as an envelope for development, and has 3 different categories: up to 5 stories, up to 7 stories, and up to 9 being colour graded, the lightest blue being up to 5, and the darkest being up to 8. The application has been amended since it was first submitted to remove a proposal for landmark buildings of up to 12 stories, and also to simplify the height limits to give it a single maximum height that includes an allowance for pitched roof. This is a uses parameter plan, so it sets out where on the site different uses can be, and it deals with upper floor uses and ground floor uses. Ground floor uses being dealt with by hatching, upper floor uses being solid colour. Upper floor uses are predominantly sort of light blue and orange, so they're residential, and the orange is potentially C3 residential or student accommodation. The hatching controls where different types of ground floor commercial uses might be acceptable. The purple and the red are where buildings are potentially wholly commercial. Purple could be a hotel, red can be commercial uses and food and drink, and the green hatching allows that area to be commercial use as well as conditions limiting the maximum amount of residential commercial floor space. There are also conditions proposed to ensure the community uses floor space is delivered to ensure that replacement for existing employment floor space is delivered within the scheme. Yellow hatching makes provision for education uses and commercial and service uses around the electricity bulk supply point. Green and blue infrastructure. Importantly, the spaces between buildings, the bottom end of the site, also provide green links to be delivered between the canal and the railway line, both of which are important wildlife corridors. And it sets out how those secondary streets will accommodate blue and green infrastructure. We'll see some detailed drawings of that, illustrative drawings later. The purple areas are public spaces, which are managed in their own way. There's also a framework plan. This sets out frontages, how those should be treated. This guides how where active frontages should be. Also in the orange, where special care needs to be taken with building design to make sure it is respectful of the adjoining residential occupiers. It identifies where play spaces will be, where focal points will be, the asterisk, and draws together some of the information to guide further reserved matters applications. So the application is an outline to the matter of principle, and the access are being improved at this stage. These are detailed plans, the layout of the access, showing how Water Lane is retained its current form, with new buildings on the side of it, so that space will become wider. But how the principal access then is brought from Water Lane down into Town Lane, into the site, and onwards towards the railway line to form that access route along parallel to the railway line, Foundry Lane. How buildings might sit within those tested. It also looks at includes the red line extends to include the two arches, the left hand one of which will become vehicular route, still restricted to a single vehicle width, so controlled by traffic lights and controlled in terms of the type of vehicles. So service vehicles, public service vehicles, emergency vehicles can use that, but not open to general traffic. And how the existing underpass becomes a shared pedestrian cycle route. Detailed vertical alignment, show how buses can pass through that, how the road levels need to be adjusted to ensure they can pass through. The key issues identified in the report and dealt with on a topic basis, we'll look at the first sort of 9 of these with some slides, but they have a sort of they have a visual dimension to them, they have plans. I'd like to talk you through some of the later ones. We'll just take as per the report, but we'll touch on in the presentation. So the first of these is flood risk. So this is a plan from the Environment Agency. It looks at the risk of flooding in the area and the hatched marks. So the blue shows flood zone 3. The hatch marks show those areas that are benefiting from the current flood defences, which were recently improved to a 1 in 100 year standard. The site is still at risk of flooding if those flood defences were breached or overtopped. And the site would be further at risk of flooding due to climate change. And we look at a design life of 100 years, and we look at the way climate change will affect flood risk over that time. So whilst the site does benefit from flood defences, the level of protection will be eroded over time, and also there is the risk of overtopping. So the response to flood risk is several. One is to raise buildings up, and the Environment Agency are happy with the proposals, and the proposal that ground floor uses are non-residential, so there are no more vulnerable uses on the ground floor. Those are all upper floors, so that people are safe from flooding on the upper floors and the ground floors, and those upper floors must be a minimum of 1 foot above the design flood level, so 300 mil above the design flood level, whereas less vulnerable ground floor uses, storage uses, ancillary uses, and some commercial uses can be 500 millimetres below the design flood level. What this plan also highlights is that part of the site, that raised area railway land, is actually in flood zone 1. It is free from flood risk. It's the opportunity for people to escape to that as well, and for that to be a place of refuge and a place for escape onwards. At the time the application was submitted, the flood escape route that had been looked at was the potential for that raised railway line. So you can see the area of the site that is free of flood risk, but also an area of raised railway line, and how that might be used as a bridge over the main line to get you to that be required. And then a flood escape route could be constructed using the raised railway line, which is currently no longer used for railway use, and that would take you out through the area of Marsh Barton at a raised level towards safety. Further flood risk assessment of the Exeter plan, looking at a number of sites around the city, but also Water Lane, looked at a total of 11 different options for flood escape, and looked at a detailed site assessment of flood risk, not just looking at the application site, but looking at the wider Water Lane, which is the hatched area, identifies a number of areas that are free of flood risk, even in the climate change 100-year sort of timescale. So you can see the area of the application site remains free of flood risk. Also a large area of white land on the adjacent gas holder site. One of the options, alternative option, would be to link this site, the gas holders area that is safe from flood risk, and look at how that could be linked across the Valley Park. These guys would need a new bridge over the canal, possibly upgrading or replacing the existing suspension bridge and narrow concrete bridge over the flood relief channel, and taking towards high ground towards St Leonard's side. There are advantages and disadvantages of both, and there are a number of other options still being explored. The strategic flood risk assessment indicates that a route would be needed by 2035, 2039, given the increasing risk of flooding and climate change. So the site is previously industrial use, identified as contaminated. Site investigations, intrusive site investigations, have been carried out. So we know we have a good understanding of groundwater and contamination on the site, and a series of further conditions we proposed to any consent granted for remediation strategy. That will be carried out for verification of that strategy that has been successful. So the application would include cleaning up and making the site safe for residential development, flatted form. It also identified air quality issues from the gas peaking plant south of the site that would need to be addressed before the southern part of the site could be made safe for residential use. And that's a short-term air quality issue every time that plant operates, which is infrequently. It's not a long-term breach of the annual emissions limits, the type you see more commonly with associated with highways. There are also noise impacts on the site. So in Marsh Barton, some of the waste operations, particularly the MRF facility, have occasionally quite high levels of noise, restricted the daytime operating of the plant. We have the applicants undertaken more surveys and been on site of those waste operations, looking at the activities that take place, when they take place, and then the noise levels that are experienced on the application site, and having a better understanding of that. We understand there is a significant impact of some of those activities, but that can be addressed through building design, building layout, facade design, how buildings are ventilated so people can have comfort inside those buildings. That has been confirmed that internal comfort standards can be achieved without the need for mechanical ventilation. The flip side of noise is that you've got operations there that might be the subject of noise complaints from the site. So we've established that buildings can be designed so you have internal comfort. So that should not be the case. So there shouldn't be any threat to the future operation of the waste facilities. and that was the subject of ongoing discussion with Devon County Council, their waste team, and they are now satisfied with the conditions subject to the tweak in the update sheet. There was also a high pressure gas main under the site, and there are hazardous substances consents relating to the former gas holders' use. So in terms of those hazardous substances consents, we have issued a revocation order of those consents. So the consents we granted historically, we have issued a revocation order that needs to be confirmed by the Secretary of State, and hence the recommendation on the application is subject to that order being confirmed. The red and yellow line through the application site to the gas holder's site is the high pressure gas main. There is a hazard associated with that. So that would need to be rerouted and put into a thick walled pipe to reduce the risk on the site from gas pipe to make that acceptable. And again, the health and safety executive being consulted on that, and they are satisfied that subject to that gas pipe being rerouted, and is proposed to be rerouted parallel to the railway line. Slightly difficult to see, but this is a technical drawing showing a potential realignment of that pipe, which the Wales and West are satisfied with, and the health and safety executive are satisfied with. So subject to a condition ensuring that takes place, then the development will be acceptable for the uses proposed. The site currently has a sort of low biodiversity and ecological value. As a site, that's potential for significant uplift through development. The application was submitted before the mandatory biodiversity net gain came into force, but there was a voluntary biodiversity net gain, and the work done by the applicant identifies significant potential uplift in biodiversity. It also identifies a number of trees, black poplar trees along the canal frontage, which are significant trees. Whilst the health of those trees is many of them is compromised, they do make a significant landscape impact. They should be retained, and the conditions make provision for the retention of those trees and the protection during construction. The links between the canal, which is the Canantea Wildlife Site, and the provisions for it in the ecological statements are secured through the conditions, including the RSPB's concern around bird boxes. The proposals for ecological enhancement through the ecological statements are also secured through conditions.
Excuse me, can you speak up a bit? It's almost impossible to hear anything in the back.
Apologies, I'll try and be close to the microphone. Does that help?
Yeah.
I speak towards it. So just a reminder, the heights parameters plan just washes over the entire site, regardless of whether buildings or highways. It goes to the full extent of the site, including the sort of highway. We looked at the access plan, or the height parameters plan. It just establishes maximum heights across the site. So to look at landscape impact, that is then extruded upwards to the maximum extent it could be. And visualizations are then made to standards that are verified, so you can then look at it from different viewpoints and understand what the maximum envelope of buildings could be. And the visualizations also then look at a illustrative scheme. So it is not a scheme being approved at this stage of buildings. It is illustrative. So if we look first of all from Marsh-Barton, you see how the maximum extent of the existing view on the top, maximum volume of buildings with those blue areas extruded vertically upwards, bottom. Then at the top here, you have that volume, but with an illustrative scheme within it. Buildings in this case going up to 8 stories. And on the bottom, you've got just those buildings in isolation in blue. So to give you an idea, the sort of height of buildings and what that might mean visually. Again, looking from the far side of the flood relief channel, which is in flood at this point, looking back towards the site. And the parameters plan extruded upwards and looked at, presented visually in blue. The light blue, big buildings up to 5 stories with a roof allowance. Mid blue, 7 stories of the roof, and dark blue, where buildings are up to 8 stories. And again, using a illustrative scheme in brown, and then taking that out and looking at what that might look like, that illustrative scheme. And the bottom, you may be able to make out, it's quite faint, but there is a dotted line where the former proposal we're building with a landmark building up to 12 stories has been removed. So as we move around, we look at that heights parameter and low from a variety of different viewpoints. It's the canal, the black poplar trees obtained on the frontage. Again, how that might look like as a extruded envelope and with an illustrative scheme. Looking back towards the site from the double locks with the Clapper Lane Bridge and the site beyond. Looking from the other side of the canal, the heights parameters plans, extruded and presented. The light blue stripe on the top there is the allowance for a potential pitch roof. And again with an illustrative scheme massing. The other side of the flood relief channel. And this is a view from Colleton Crescent. So this is a view that Historic England raised concerns about the development being seen in that view. It is to the south of the natural aspect out. It's worth remembering it's a private garden there, so this is taken from the public realm. Probably worth saying that we do consider that to be minor harm to that view. These are a series of extracts from the landscape and townscape impact document. It looks at it from additional views. This is a token view looking at it from beyond the city. There are a whole series of these around the hills. It will be visible in views back towards the city. I don't think we'll take the committee's time representing all of those. We see here a typical view from the hills surrounding the city back towards it. Taller buildings that are existing will be visible in those views. So to move on to more illustrative material. So this is not being determined at this stage. This is an illustrative layout, what development could look like. It shows how the new road from Town Lane comes through the site, alongside the parallel to the railway line, how buildings might be laid out on a grid. Giving the access. It looks how buildings can facilitate views through the development, so looking from the Valley Park out towards the hills, clear lines of sight between buildings, and to facilitate the sort of green links between the railway line corridor and the canal corridor. This is an illustrative view of how development of Water Lane, at the end of Water Lane at Gables Wharf, where there's a craning out point, so the canal could look. It's illustrative. So this is the layout of buildings, is a matter to be determined yet. Concerns being raised about safeguarding the craning out opportunity. And the intention and the additional condition in the update sheet would to make it explicit that we would need to agree the layout to ensure that that operation to recover boats or launch boats is preserved, and that we would work with the harbour master on the requirements for turning and manoeuvring of vehicles of a size to service the boat. And that specification be drawn up and ensure that a layout of buildings facilitates that use. At the moment, City Council ownership is on the frontage, the sort of lighter brown, and relies on working with landowners to allow manoeuvring of vehicles, because the public highway stops with the red line at the top there. So it is the opportunity, as well as a potential threat to that, it is an opportunity to formalise the arrangements for recovery of larger boats in that location by crane. It's a plan showing how uses around that space, consider say placemaking and a new place on the canal envisaged in the SPD and sign code. Some illustrative visualizations of how that might use with a space that can be public space, but also facilitates the lifting out of boats. So I stress these are illustrative views. Illustrative views, we talked about how the green streets with drainage in the street could look. Water lane, opportunity to introduce tree planting and greening. It's quite a harsh urban environment currently. How the space at Tan Lane could look with the access coming through a public square, public transport circulating from bus route through into the development. Illustrative plans showing how water flows through, but also how land levels change for buildings, identifying, working with the applicants, so everyone has an understanding how those land levels would change around buildings, how different uses are accommodated in different locations, water compatible uses and less vulnerable uses, ground floor level with more vulnerable uses, including residential on upper floors. There's two plans to put on paper an understanding about how entrances should work, with principal entrances on the canal side, people accessing development in the first instance from sustainable and active travel routes along the canal frontage, and secondary residential accesses from the vehicular access box on the railway line. So it helps understand how cycle parking, where that should be provided. So that should be provided at the entrances, which is the main entrance to the canal side, rather than on the service street, for example. A series of sections through the site. So just to go back, so when we go back and forwards, the key understandings from we start to lay out levels is that Foundry Lane is higher to be free of flood risk. So the land slopes up from Water Lane to Foundry Lane. You have an intermediate street, Central Avenue. So how do the land levels falling about across those buildings? How can that be accommodated instead of active uses, active facades on both sides of the building? So these are illustrative plans, but they help that conversation and help in the future people understand how we see those spaces working and how active facades and building footprints can be accommodated and how uses. This is the rear of the railway line, acknowledging that the building will be sunken in at that point, and how half-story entrance heights will need to be accommodated. On the canal side, to make sure that we have an understanding that buildings will, on the ground floor, be accessible from the front, would be below ground level at the back. And you can see how the dotted line Foundry Lane level is indicated. Indicative phasing plan, so secured by condition that importantly how development will be phased, showing phase one is the access being put into all these sites, how then it can be brought forward on a sort of plot by plot basis with the infrastructure in place. And then second phase, third phase, second phase in yellow, third phase, and the residential is envisaged currently being built out southern part of the site, and the buildings around Tan Lane envisaged coming later. So the application is in outline. The impact on existing residential is largely from the bill form. There are policies in the Water Lane SPD to govern how those developments should respect existing development, privacy, the impact, overlooking impact overbearing being avoided. That all come through and be considered at reserve matters stages. Talk about the residential mix. There are a number of factors which mean this application is coming forward as a flatter development. Talked about contamination, talked about noise, talked about flood risk. All these point to this site not being a good site for housing, low-rise housing, open gardens where people would have an expectation of growing vegetables and having certain noise levels. And that drives an accommodation mix, which is largely in a flatted form to bias towards smaller units. But there is demand for development at all unit sizes, so this does still make an important contribution to housing need. It includes the potential for student accommodation at all ends of the site. Includes 500 square metre community facility, which is delivered at ground floor.
Can you speak up, please? We can't hear a thing at the back.
Sorry, apologies. Talked about impacts on ecology, surface water management. The report sets out the economic developments. I've been working with the applicant and with a consultant employed on behalf of the City Council to interrogate viability. Whilst that work has identified significant improvements in the viability, there is still, we consider now safely demonstrated, a significant viability gap for the development to come forward. And on that basis, we concluded the development isn't able to provide affordable housing secured through the planning agreement. This may still come forward through other forms, where the grant for delivery is available, or where a social housing provider may take on certain plots within the area. The section 106 contributions set out in the report, we consider those are all necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, contributions to education, towards sustainable transport improvements in the networks around the site, traffic orders in and around the site for Devon County Council to manage on-street parking and traffic controls, towards off-site sports pitches, multi-use games areas, neighbourhood areas for play, to a contribution towards the flood escape route, mobility hub on site, management plans for the student accommodation, if that cuts forward, as is done on other sites in the city centre, to ensure public rights of way through the development, and to ensure habitats mitigation for impacts on the ex-estuary. The 106 should also ensure viability review on the ongoing basis through reserve matters stages as the application is developed. We envisage that being over an extended time period. That viability may change, so we want to be able to review that in the interest of securing affordable housing, and provides the energy network on the site proposed by the applicant to connect to a wider energy network. So the officer's conclusion is set out in the report in section 17. We think this is a highly accessible, sustainable site. It's a brownfield site, which local plan and national policy direct us towards. There are some harms minor heritage harm, the absence of affordable housing. But given that the development is in accordance with the local plan allocation, the outline application is in accordance with the Water Lane SPD, and given that currently we cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, we do need to take into account the tilted balance in favour of granting consent set out in the MPPF. However, even without that balance, officers considered that the benefits of the development in bringing forward this development, this housing development, on a brownfield site, close proximity to the city centre, clearly outweigh the harms, and on that basis is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the report and in the update sheet.
Thank you very much indeed, Howard. So we're now moving into the section where members are invited to question the officer on his presentation. I do see some hands up. I just want to start off with one of my own, if I may. Just pulling you straight back to a very recent comment about affordable housing. You're saying that the fact that there's no specific planning 106 arrangement for affordable housing is actually advantageous to this and may well produce affordable housing later on as part of the development and grants coming in from somewhere else, rather than us trying to condition it now and therefore threatening the viability of the site. Is that what you're saying, or is that a correct interpretation?
No, I would say it is unfortunate that development isn't viable and isn't providing a policy compliant offer of affordable housing secured at this stage. What I would say is that if you don't have any sort of affordable housing secured by planning, you then become eligible for other sources of funding.
So thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the officer for that lengthy and full presentation. I just wanted to have some more clarification on 4 points, if I might. First is the status of the parameter plan. We've had issues in the past about parameter planning when we go from outline stage to further application stage and suddenly find the parameter plan is a little bit more than a plan. It sets so many things literally in concrete, height, etc. So can you clarify, because you talked about this application only being about access, etc. What is the status of the parameter plan in regard to layout, massing, density and height? Because again, you've talked on several occasions about the 5, the 7 and the 9 barrier heights on buildings. So that's the first question. Second question, in the presentation, you showed us a potential mix, which included PBSA, a hotel, commercial, etc. To what extent is that a fixed solution to this, or are we going to come back again and again with amendments to the mix that appears on the site? Thirdly, in regard to infrastructure, although we're talking about access only at the moment, there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure going to take place on this site. Can you tell me, is this in the control of a single developer, or are we going to be having piecemeal work done on infrastructure so that you could actually get the first part of the road never built because it's this is the last bit developed, etc.? How can we ensure that the infrastructure is in place in many cases before the physical development has taken place for the people already residing there? And lastly, in regard to the visualizations you showed us, do we have to consider as an authority, or do you have to consider the impact of light intrusion at night? None of those blocks were lit up. I've been intrigued to see what the view would be from the centre of Exeter, an 8-storey one with 100 flats or whatever, 50 or 60 flats, or the lights on, whether we have to take account of light intrusion. And just on the Chair's point, I'll be talking about viability in my contribution rather than a question. Thank you.
Okay, so the parameters plans effectively limit the permission. So for example, the heights plan limits the height. If a building proposed was taller than shown in the parameters plan, it wouldn't be within the outline consent. It would have to be a separate planning application. So, the parameters plan limit the consent. You have to work within them. Otherwise, you can't be a reserved matter. It has, it would have to come forward separately. It is only access. It's the principal development and access that's being considered at this stage. So the layout of the development, scale, massing, landscaping, appearance are all reserved. So you will get separate reserved matters applications coming forward on those matters. In terms of the mix, again, there are conditions which take that mix into the outline planning application. They set limits on the amount of housing and a PBSA because the application has been assessed on those traffic impacts. Other impacts have been assessed on that mix. Some floor spaces are also secured as minimum. So employment type floor spaces are re-provided on like for like. That's not to say you can get a separate application come forward, change the mix, or an application to revise the conditions. But it is being said there would have to be a separate application considered if you wanted to change any of those. In terms of infrastructure, the phasing plan showed the access, the foundry lane, the canal banks, all being one first phase. And that is what is secured by condition. The phasing plan is secured by condition 6. If you want to change the phasing in any way, you'd have to change that plan, come back with a new application. But it is envisaged that infrastructure, access infrastructure, would all be delivered as phase 1. The building plots sit within that and would be delivered individually as phases following. And the conditions are set out in that way in a number of ways. Lighting is an interesting one because the canal is sensitive to lighting, or rather the ecology of the canal is sensitive to lighting. So there is a condition controlling external lighting. And the lighting strategy has been shown to be able to not affect the wildlife. Buildings would also, not just external lighting control, but also internal lighting. So there is a condition requiring automatic shuttering as a precautionary fallback position. As the buildings aren't designed at this stage, you can't actually predict what the outspill might be. That's why it's reserved in that way. So we would need to understand the detailed design of the building. We'd anticipate we would require a lighting assessment with the detailed design to show how internal lighting in the buildings would affect particularly the canal because of the sensitivities there. That gives us control over those matters.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Patrick, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for that presentation. I know there was an awful lot to get through, so thank you. Obviously, this is such a significant development. Just actually following up from Councillor Mitchell's question, if that's okay. So the in terms of the sort of height parameters, that is a condition that we are making a decision on today as part of the outline application. Obviously, we've got different zones up to 8 stories, up to 7 stories, up to 5 stories. So the kind of arrangement of those zones will be sort of confirmed by the decision today. So they couldn't be shifted unless it went back. Okay, that's fine. So they couldn't just. That's not just an example. That zoning is a fixed arrangement. Okay, that's great. Thank you. And just something on the section 106 payments, prospective payments, the amounts per dwelling, do they apply sort of 1-for-1 with PPSA, so student accommodation and co-living, or is there like a ratio in place for those?
So, for example, PBSA, the GP surgeries contributions, there is a ratio. It's done on a per person basis. The education contributions wouldn't apply at all. It's a ratio of 0. The transport are fixed, so the contributions to Dem County are fixed. They aren't affected by it. Other items. There would be a ratio. So just looking down the list, so those would actually be built into the 106. So in the recommendations are just the heads of terms. Within the 106 would be the actual formulas to proportionate to different types of uses. Some of the contributions only apply to family type dwellings, obviously some to in different ways. So that would be tied up in the detail of the 106.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Councillor Atkinson next.
Thank you. The energy, the district energy facility it's going to link to, is that the proposed one in Grace Road, where the building site was for the former for the
So this site has its own network, which
Right.
would come forward, and has an energy centre at the back of the has a location for energy centre at the back of the electricity bulk supply point. It would be air source heat pump powered.
Okay.
There is a requirement in 106 for them to use best endeavours to connect to the energy from waste plant. That is a source of waste heat, well, not waste heat, but there is a source of heat there. We would expect them to use best endeavours to try to connect that. It may be that it connects to the network that is proposed, but this is not contingent on it. It would.
But there are other options available, and you've already mentioned the energy from waste plus that. Okay, and then one other question. This is Woodville Road, which is an area that I represent, and it goes up to a sort of dead end into the allotment site. That is an area of deprivation, and as part of wellbeing, and is highlighted as being part of wellbeing Exeter. I have raised this with you planning. I just wondered if this is any part of the active travel plan to make it possible for that part of the city to link up to the Valley Park in any way at all. Are there any plans in this, or could that be added to the Section 106 agreement?
Section 106 matters need to relate to the development being considered. There are improvements to the sustainable transport networks in the area and substantial contributions towards that secured. We can't secure specific benefits to Woodville Road. They need to relate to the application site. But
Okay,
I think
so that would have to be dealt with by SIL, that process, or Devon County Council.
it's not a matter for this application.
Right,
So
okay. I'm just
deal with
trying
that
to keep
separately.
pushing it.
Thank you. Councillor Miliband.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Mitchell actually ran through quite a few of my questions, so thank you for that. So I only have one. So given there's a viability gap, and that's the reason why there's no affordable being provided on the site, how confident can we be on the list of SIL and Section 106 obligations that they will be delivered? Like, if the developer came back and said the viability is worse than we thought, would they be able to renegotiate them, or are they set in stone?
So we consider these contributions to be necessary to make the development acceptable.
Thank you.
Councillor Ralston.
Thank you, Chair. Again, most of my questions have been asked, so I'll keep it brief. With regard to the 106 payments for the Devon County Council for the school, I note that it says that the land is being provided. Is that on the site or is that elsewhere?
So there isn't any land being provided within this site. Is a financial contribution towards off-site provision. The Water Lane SPD includes a site for a school nearby on the north side of Water Lane. It's not in this application, but that is the aspiration to deliver a school in the area, but it's not part of this application.
Are you able to just show on one of the maps roughly where it is in relation or not? Because it's not related to this, I'm getting frowned at. That's okay if not.
Thank you. Councillor Jobson.
Thank you. Just drilling down into Councillor Mitchell's question a bit more, you can see that there is a maximum height to the buildings, and I know that the SPD provides that maximum. But if a future planning committee, bearing in mind the MPPF, the SPD and all the rest of it, came to a conclusion that a particular building proposed was too high, would they have the ability to say so and say, well, we like most of the others, but this particular block of flats we think is too high. Can you tell me on page 25 of the report, where you say up to 320 bed spaces in purpose-built student accommodation or sui generis housing types, what other housing types, the PBSA, you had in mind? And finally, Gabriel's Wharf is absolutely vital. The work that is done, the ability to bring heavy cranes onto site, is it absolutely guaranteed that this development will enable Gabriel's Wharf? I see that this development would involve the demolition of buildings on the site, but that Gabriel's Wharf could continue its absolutely vital operations. Thank you.
Is Howard taking that, or are you taking
Gabriel's Wharf.
Yeah. Okay, so Howard.
So in terms of the building heights, this sets a maximum, but the Water Lane SPD is planning guidance. Scale and layout are still reserved matters. So the Water Lane, you know, the height parameters do set a maximum height. What we are more concerned about is to get buildings that height to be acceptable, the massing needs to be right. So it's about modulating things, it's about breaking up the massing. If you came forward like the blue boxes we saw, you know, that's not acceptable. So the planning policy is there to make sure the buildings that come forward as reserved matters are acceptable. They'll be judged against that planning policy. To achieve the sort of heights that are set as maximums here, the massing would need to be right. So it isn't just a case of you can build the entire site up to those heights. There is you know, strong design coding in place for this area. So there is stronger policy in place for this area than other parts of the city. It's got a recently adopted supplementary planning document that sets a design code. So that is a consideration as we consider layout and massing scale of buildings.
Thank you.
The PBSA, Gabriel's Wharf.
The PBSA, it is purpose-built student accommodation that's applied for, not another sui generis type.
That's an error in the report then, where it says or sui generis housing types.
Yes, that is an error.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do I have?
So we've got with the update sheet, we've made a specific condition to make that more explicit, that we do need a layout that facilitates the craning point. The craning point is in the supplementary planning document. It is a requirement. We will work with the harbour master on the specification of, you know, what do they need in terms of space and manoeuvring and different types of vehicle, and we'll bring that forward. But the layout of the site as a whole is reserved matter.
Right, do I have any other councillors? Councillor Ketchy.
Just to get my head round the proportions, maybe for the other people that are not clear either. There's two sort of elements to the bulk and general design of it that strike me that my colleagues have raised, but I still don't feel I've got a grasp of it. So I'm going to sort of express it slightly differently. We've seen on other sites that total square meterage is sort of a parameter that's used as a maximum to allow a certain density of massing of typically floor space. And it's been mentioned on the commercial side. Is there a way of expressing that or having a maximum in the way that we've had it with other sites, such as the West Ex would be a good example? Because we've seen before that sometimes these outline parameters seem to be, rather than limits for developers, they seem to be targets to reach. That's sort of been the expression of some residents before, and I just wondered if you could comment to that.
So the application is made in terms of unit numbers, bed spaces in respect to the residential development, and it's, you know, a lot of the impacts are assessed on that basis, and it is, you know, it is limited on that basis. But this is outline, and in this case, you know, scale and layout are not being approved. So for the scale and layout is to be judged yet, and to be judged against the planning policies in the Water Lane SPD and the design code there. So the massing of buildings aspects and so on are quite, there's much more detailed guidance for this site than there is for any other part of the city.
So very much following on with that then, the building heights parameter plan sort of mentions the various heights of the various stories. So for instance, 8-story could be 32 metres. And these stories seem to be essentially 4 metres a story if you sort of look at the figures. The Water Lane SPD talks about a more typical national size of story at 2.5 metres, and that would be much more normal. What is the rationale? What is, because it's the height's been mentioned already by other people, but what is the rationale to allow stories at 4 metres? Because that absolutely determines the potential for the massing, irrespective of the number of units.
I don't think that in itself determines the massing. Massing is still to be agreed. It determines the maximum height. The story heights in the SPD, I do think, are at the lower end of what is practical. The story heights here, in terms of, and the Water Lane does allow 4 metres for the ground floor. The SPD has ground floor stories at 4. This is 4.5. Water Lane SPD talk about 3 for residential. That's quite tight for some of the forms of residential here. The heights, the overall heights of buildings, 3.5, I would say, is more typical, more, I think it is acceptable to use that. But what they have done is taken those building heights, worked out the massing of them, plonked that into the landscape, and looked at verified views to see if it's acceptable. So whilst the story heights are slightly different, the story heights proposed here have been assessed in the landscape, and we looked at those, and we do consider those maximum heights, given that massing isn't being considered at the moment. Those maximum heights, given the controls we've got over massing and so on, layout still to come, we do feel they are acceptable and they have been assessed of their impact in the landscape.
Thank you, Howard. Sorry, Councillor Kench. Yes.
Sorry, just a couple of simpler items. The PBSA is part of the scheme, and if the PBSA numbers were to change, does that require a second application, or is that just a very loose split at this time? Because I've got the question.
If there were more than 320 bed spaces, it would be outside the scope of the outline consent and require a separate permission.
Okay. If the PBSA can't be rented, because there's anecdotal evidence around the city in my ward that there's student accommodation isn't being rented out just now, and I can see it as a risk in the future in Exeter that we've got PBSA. We can't have dead assets of new accommodation types that have been built. But they don't meet the normal standards for housing in the city. They're not the aspiration we have for normal housing unit standards. If PBSA can't be rented out, are there sort of protections for housing standards such that this doesn't then get rented out as normal housing or get rebranded as co-living, and then we have potentially some of the housing stock isn't of the sort of national standards that we'd aspire to?
First of all, the application makes provision for those areas at the north end of the site to be either flatted development or PBSA. The application was submitted in August 2023. It may be that the demand has changed. I'm sure the developer will be, taking account of demand before sort of bringing forward, and those are brought forward sort of later in the phasing. They wouldn't meet the standards for housing, either national or local standards for housing. They wouldn't be acceptable as housing. And we are developing standards for PBSA through the Exeter plan. So they will be judged against that in the future.
My last question is just very small and probably quite straightforward. The cycle schemes that I mentioned is sort of integral to the transport hub, and I think there's possibly 2, if I read it right, there's 2 sort of rented electric cycling hubs envisaged. There's been no bid for Devon for a cycle hire scheme, electric or not. Will that, as an asset for the city, this infrastructure that's to be put forward, be put in place irrespective of no vendor coming forward, no provider coming forward, because obviously what we want to do is future-proof any vendor coming forward. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, the transport strategy for the development is dependent on mobility hub and those provisions and getting people using them. The developer would have to bring forward that facility and it'd be run for this development. So if there isn't a wider scheme in the city, it just means there isn't somebody else they can get in to manage it. It would still need to be delivered.
Thank you, Councillor Pole.
Sorry, just to pick up on that point. So where there's provision for the 50 electric bike in the vehicle, whatever project. So are those would just be for residents, or what's the sort of plan for those?
If there was no wider scheme they could be part of, yes, they'd be delivered for residents. So you would be, as a residential development, a lot of journeys be to and from home, so they'll be available for people to use to and from home. We still think they would contribute to sustainable travel in the city and be very successful avoiding car journeys.
And that would that would, if there didn't turn out to be the demand in the residents, there would be some flexibility for them to be able to be used by other residents, or have you got any? Are there some limitations on that, or sort of
I think it's a very good question how that is managed to make sure it is there for residents, but it's usable by others. I see if there isn't a citywide scheme, I'm not sure how it would work, but I think local residents might use it. But I think that is something we should consider. Just talk to the developers about making them that other people can be a member of it. I don't see any reason why not. If there are people who are not part of this site, there might be a different charging regime, but I think in principle, yes, we should aim for that. Yeah.
I'd quite like to see some sort of options in there, depending on to make sure that they aren't sort of underused. If you see what I mean.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to talk about the viability aspect and affordable housing. Is there any scope to be able to put a condition on that the viability would be reviewed during each phase that's coming forward? Thank you.
Yes, it's recommended to be included in the Section 106 agreement that incorporates a viability review at key stages, including reserve matters.
Around any other questions? Right, okay, we're moving on to speakers now. First of all, those councillors speaking under standing order number 44. I will take them in the alphabetical order that they're in my... Sorry, Councillor Getchett. I was hoping that we could listen to our speakers first and then we'd have a break and then come back, summary from the director and our debate. Okay, so hopefully at half time. So I'm calling on our first councillor speaking under standing order 44, as I'll take them in alphabetical order before me. So that's Councillor Moore, please. Welcome, Councillor Moore. As I'm sure you're aware, there is no strict time limit to your contribution, but please try and keep it as opposite as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. Today, I am not here to ask you to refuse this. I ask that you refer to the supplement paper that Councillor Reid and I submitted. I'm obviously not going to read it out, you'll be pleased to know, because I know that you've read it. But I want to say a few words about why we're raising these issues. And these have been distilled from a longer list as the most essential for you to consider, I would request. So I'm here to ask you to clarify what you are about to approve. And this is completely within your gift to clarify and amend. Over the last 3 years or so, ward councillors in St David's have worked hard with the community First, to ensure they were able to contribute to the Water Lane SPD, and secondly, to engage with the developer on this proposal. So we are at a significant point in the journey. I can see, and I do thank the developer team who have worked hard to listen to much of the feedback. However, there are some really important points that must be considered at the heart of the recommendations and the change that we all want to see for this community this evening. You are being asked to agree an outline planning permission focused on access, but actually the decision is greater than that, and there are a number of parameter plans and conditions that will be approved, and the parameter plans are set out in one of the conditions. And some of these are much wider than transport access, and some of these, I'm afraid to say, aren't clear, or they differ from the wording in the intentions set out in the report. We know from our experience on the planning committee that matters agreed to at outline stage can't be changed at reserved matter stage. So what is and isn't agreed will have a serious effect on what comes forward in future years. The development is large, so it is highly likely that once this outline planning permission is granted, that some of the site may be sold off or developed in parcels. And we can learn from developments in Moncton and other large sites such as Southwest Exeter and also Ryden Lane. Outline consent has proven problematic in some cases. First and foremost, I'd like to address the issue of affordable housing. The supplementary planning document has a policy requirement of 35% affordable housing, which includes social housing, and this is a major material consideration. Contrary to what is being said in the report, in the conditions, the developer expected to provide nothing. The report highlights that if this condition is removed, that affordable housing may be secured in other ways. I believe this is the wrong thing to do. I also believe it is unnecessary at this outline stage to remove that obligation. The financial viability assessment has been undertaken by the developer. I'm not quite sure if the planning team shared this with the planning committee, so I requested it and forwarded it on to everybody. So I hope you've had an opportunity to have a look at it. The council appointed an independent assessment with this financial viability assessment. This was undertaken, and the agent then had further discussions as set out in the addendum. Interestingly, the independent report suggests the viability gap isn't as big as the financial viability assessment suggests, but it does identify that affordable housing is still unlikely to be delivered on site by the developer alone. Fair enough. I do understand that difficulty, and of course, the land values are fixed, which affects the viability from the start, especially as it has been a complicated site to assemble. But as the review of the financial viability assessment states, over economic cycles, the viability will change. We're talking about a long-term project here, 10 years or so. What's unviable today may be profitable tomorrow. And as this development is being brought forward over the next 10 years, reserved matters applications will be brought forward to many planning committees. At each point, I expect we will see a new viability assessment. However, the council will not be able to negotiate at that point a new Section 106 condition regarding affordable and social housing, because if it is removed now, then we as a council will have surrendered that right forever, and a future council will not be able to renegotiate. The developer will be free to develop or sell on a site with planning permission, free of affordable housing obligations. Any change in viability in relation to affordable housing should only be considered at each reserved matters stage, not now. Now it can be retained in principle, and I would urge you to stick to the council's principles. Now you will be told that in order to secure funding, and in fact we've heard this from other sources, the obligations must be removed. So I just want to compare this to a case that we've already seen in the council, the case of Clifton Hill. Exeter City Living developed a scheme with a policy-compliant affordable housing provision. When the push came to shove, they found they couldn't deliver that. At that point, they were in active negotiations with Homes England. Homes England fund affordable housing where it can't be provided by the developer. And as part of that, the obligations do need to be removed from the consent at that time. This unlocks the funding. However, here, the report is saying that the developer should be relieved of this obligation from the get-go. This removes any incentive to build in affordable homes into the forecasts, which would be a basis for negotiation with Homes England. With no requirement, a future council won't have any negotiating ability for affordable and social homes, or consider if that obligation might be reduced or lifted at a reserved matters stage when a firm proposal for alternative funding may have been developed to a realistic stage. It has also been mentioned that a social housing provider may take on a plot. That would be great, but we have no evidence of this. Planning committees deal with evidence. Homes England has recently set up a clearinghouse to try and encourage housing providers to take on Section 106 housing, as they have been very reluctant to do so. Again, we can't take a fingers crossed approach. Of course, by the time the next reserve matters comes through, then the economy might have improved, and the viability will demonstrate that affordable and social housing can be, or partially can be, provided by the developer. This site is described in the SPD as Exeter's quality flagship development. Without affordable housing, that claim is sunk, and our community is denied the affordable and social housing that is desperately needed. The second significant area is around transport, and a number of points are indicated in our additional objection. We applaud the commitment to active travel, but critical gaps remain. The developer has clarified that they will not provide a bridge over the canal which would enable east-west cycle route set out in the LC whip, and this has been suggested as a flood egress route. I am not suggesting that the developer be required to provide this, but I do think it's essential that the bridge be indicated not as a further obligation on the developers, but so that the developer knows how to design the streets to connect up to this. I'm also really concerned that active travel hasn't really considered walking. There are no proposals to improve the Gabriel's Wharf underpass. We saw the photos of the little creek and the dark tunnel under the railway and the double dog leg around the back of the Dulex building. I would not walk there at night. We need to see significant improvements to make this safe. There is no improvement or even recognition put in our first objection, not recorded in the report, of the importance to be able to walk down Willies Avenue and then turn left onto Alphington Road. For example, if you wanted to go shopping at Aldi or if walking to Westex School. This is an extremely dangerous bridge, and people still walk there, even though there's a little sign to encourage them to turn back and go over the crossing rather than walk through the little gap left in the fence. I have asked Network Rail, and they have said it is viable to reopen this tunnel to create a pavement. However, both of these vital walking routes are not recognised and should be recognised as such in the access plans. In terms of phasing, we also need to see public transport put in place before the first folks move in. The C bus is very quick to get into town and out of town, but unless it runs in the evenings and weekends, people will feel isolated and frustrated. Early public transport provision must be conditioned. It's currently not. Lastly, I'm very disappointed that there are no plans from the developer or the city or the county council for a transport strategy across the Haven Banks area. Theoretically, there'll be fewer cars as a proportion of homes in this development, something I welcome, but I will be very surprised, however, if it turns out to be as low as is predicted.
Even so, if those are the figures, this genuinely quiet neighbourhood of Haven Banks will be changed, with a heavy burden on these neighbourhood roads, which will be changed to major through routes, not least for the delivery of building materials for the next 10 years. There needs to be a serious discussion between the developers and the councils for such a strategy to ensure road safety and traffic flow, and consideration how the impact of this can be minimised on the area. We have to remember that the main entrance in and out of the Haven Banks area, which leads to the site, is through the clogged up box junction by the riverside. This is not a sustainable route. Adding to the pressure on this junction is not going to help the residents in the new development, existing residents in Haven Road, visitors to the quay, and in fact, anybody who thinks of travelling over X bridges. The requirement for the developer to work with residents and the councils to develop a transport strategy and reconsider access for the area would be an important addition to release not only this site, but all the sites in the area. So I'm not asking for money, I'm just asking for a requirement for them to work together. We can't keep just adding more and more cars and vehicles onto the road and cross our fingers. But maybe that's all we can do if we can't cross the roads full of traffic. In our further objection, we have highlighted the extent to which the proposed heights in the parameter plans far exceed those set out in the SPD by 12 metres and 20 metres for the maximum number of stories. So I would ask that you interrogate those views that we've been shown this evening and bring them back in line with the SPD. So what we're talking about is heights, which are half the height and 2/3 of the height of the incinerator tower nearby. Thank you for listening to me. I want to refer you back to the supplement document that we've produced. And also, I am looking forward to hearing the speech from the Civic Society in a minute. Myself, Councillor Reid and Councillor Sparling before, and Civic Society and the community have all worked together to be able to present a coherent voice, which the three of us will be speaking about this evening. I am urging you, please look in detail at the conditions. Please amend the conditions in order to give greater clarity to the community, clarity to the developer, and clarity to a future council and councillors who will have to consider these matters in detail. On the whole, the majority of the community want to see Water Lane developed, and they want to see it developed well. This isn't just any development, it will be one of Exeter City Council's defining legacies. We mustn't compromise on livable Exeter's stated values and the needs of our people. The future of our city does literally hang in the balance here, and let's tip the scales towards progress and craft a truly inclusive, sustainable community that will make Exeter shine.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Now inviting questions of Councillor Moore on the presentation that just received. I can remind you, please make comments relating to what has been said, and let's not lead the conversations off into other matters. Councillor Atkinson.
Oh, hello. Thank you. I just want to refer you to page 118, 119. Several of your objections was predicated on the basis that there is no transport plan, but you see at point 50 there, it says prior to occupation of any building, a strategy for the delivery of a transport hub will be established. Then 51 signage and all the rest of it. Prior to occupation of any building, a strategy for provision of bus stops has been agreed with the LPA. Cycle parking, the same, car parking, a travel plan. A travel plan for each phase will be submitted and approved in writing, again, prior to any occupation. So would you agree that, in fact, some of your objections are already dealt with in this, in the proposals and conditions that are already there?
May I? Thank you, Councillor Atkinson. That's a really excellent question, because if you read the detail of that point, it actually talks about a transport strategy for the area that is to be developed, and for that area alone. What I have been talking about in my document is a wider transport strategy, which is referred to in the supplementary planning document, covering the Haven Banks area, which is the main and only vehicular Exeter vehicles to this site, and that's what has not been considered. It does not consider how this site connects up to the wider area, and that transport strategy that is mentioned is predicated on the access plans that you'll be looking at, and they omit those particular points around walking and the bridge that I've mentioned. So I'm really pleased that you've asked that question, because it enables me to make sure it's absolutely clear that whilst I applaud the active travel that's being produced on site, it does not consider the connectivity and the infrastructure necessary in adjacent areas.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Well, I've read it from them, and
Well, sorry, I just wanted to come back because we saw.
No, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm afraid
She's made a statement.
I'm moving on. Okay, thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Could I just come back onto the affordable social housing and viability issue? You're suggesting that it better if we as a planning committee incorporate the requirement within the planning application agreement, whereas what is being recommended by the officer, though it does not differ, but you get at one stage on 81 all the reasons why you can't do something, and then in the last paragraph you get the suggestion following on from the revised report from the independent assessors, which states, if I quote the sentence here, a positive resolution in favour of the scheme in principle and subject to the agreement of appropriate S106 obligations, including a viability mechanism in due course. And that is emboldened, the idea of that. And that is now been written into the report, totally unclear on page 88, whether it's a formal recommendation. It fits as a part of the report. Any consent should only be granted subject to a mechanism within a legal agreement to review viability at key stages of the development as the development progresses, and to secure affordable housing if the viability of the development or individual phases of the development can be demonstrated in future. In your opinion, does that satisfy your need in regard to a social housing commitment within this application?
thank you for your question. So if you read through the conditions which are set out at the back of the report, the 87 conditions which will accompany the permission, that differs from what is said in the report. So what I'm saying is that if the affordable housing is maintained in principle, then that viability mechanism will be able to operate. The condition as written relieves the developer of any obligation to provide affordable housing or to engage in that viability process. It can't be left as a gentleman's agreement. It has to be set out firmly in writing that the principle and the commitment to affordable and social housing is there, and that at future reserved matter stages there can be future negotiation. It does not say that in the recommendations. Now, if there's a technical legal wording that I've misunderstood, then I'd be very happy to, if that's clarified. But reading through those conditions in detail, which we have, it is not there. That's why I gave the example of what happened with Exeter City Living. But we have to know that the developer has been in active negotiations with the council, with Homes England, with an RSL, with a body that has a viable and active interest in taking this forward. That is not set out in the conditions, and that's what you're agreeing to. You're not, the officer's report is helpful background, but the may and should, it doesn't cut the mustard.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Councillor Ketchin.
You mentioned the disparity between the building heights parameter plan and the Water Lane SPD, and so make the point that the disparity is rather large. Are you not reassured by the maximum heights that are suggested for approximating about 4 meters per floor? Or do you feel there is some perhaps rehashing or reworking of that to provide better protection for the area in terms of the heights, maximum heights of the stories?
Okay, thank you. Heights are a really important issue. The supplementary planning document, there's a lot of work that went into that to determine what appropriate heights would be for this area in terms of its local context to adjacent community buildings. And at the key, they are high. They're like 5-6 stories. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with higher density and the heights. However, the proposed heights by the developer really push that up. So that 8 stories, pushing it up, was it a further 12 meters above the maximum 6-story height identified in the SPD, and double that, 40 meters, in the if it's a non-commercial building, will have a really significant impact, not just on the local community and the Valley Park, but also from the views around the city. This will be really, really visible from all the way around from Mincing Lake, from southwest Exeter and Alphington, Exwig. It will be massively visible, particularly those heights. And the other thing which is a material consideration is the fact of the visual landscape assessment talked about the impact on the heritage, and Heritage England, I think, have commented on this, and there are important views from the city and from Colleton Crescent, which is which up there is the conservation area, and particular views. So I think the heights will have a significant bearing, and be incinerator towers if we're not careful.
Thank you, Councillor Banyard.
Just talking about public transport.
Yeah.
Saying that what you would like to see is that the C bus route would be conditioned before the housing goes in. I just wondered what powers does the developer have to create a bus route through a new development? Isn't that a matter for Stagecoach? How would we actually enforce a new bus route through Water Lane?
Okay, thank you. So the C bus already exists. It goes through Tan Lane, and the proposals that the developer brought through very creative, and the tunnel's been freed up so it can get through there and then have active travel alongside. That's all fabulous. The limitations with the C bus are that it only runs during the day, Monday to Saturday. It doesn't run on a Sunday, and it doesn't run in the evening. So it's not up to the developer to be able to condition that. They can't do that. It's up to the councils to require that. Quite often in new developments, developers may have to pay a contribution while it gets going, because if you've only got 50 people living in a block, it's not necessarily viable to run it in the evenings. But because of the number of people living there, and that will be the main bus route, and the C as well going through Tan Lane, and the access at the top, it runs along the side. And so you'll be able to get in at the southern end because it stops at Marsh Barton Station. So it's a really good bus route. It runs parallel, so it's really good. You'll also be able to cut through under the little horrible Gables Wharf pass, but maybe not in the evening. So that is a really good bus route. It just needs to make sure it operates. So that must be a condition, because then that focuses mind of the councils to get that operating at the right times.
Thank you. I saw Councillor Paul.
Sorry, just to follow up on that. So my understanding is that there's been bus devolution regulation legislation, but that the current Cabinet at Devon County Council has said that they're not going to take up those powers. So, sorry, I'm sort of confused. I don't.
They've got no powers to do so at the present moment.
So
Sorry, I
they,
can just interrupt. Have you got a question to Councillor Moore on the presentation that she's made to us?
yeah, I just trying to, I still am unclear about how this committee could sort of, you know, have any control over how the bus and then the other thing was sort of in the LC whip. I'm just trying to identify where this is the bridge identified as new provision. Is the other thing is on the bridge, is the bridge, are you saying that the bridge is identified as new provision in the LC whip? And yeah, I'm not quite sure exactly what you're asking for about that either.
Okay, thank you. So,
Just a moment, Councillor Moore. You would just switch us off.
of course.
I will like to answer that, but I am asking, well, we're moving way away from the application in front of us, which is an outline planning application. I understand that. Allow the question, allow the answer, but we must move on. Okay.
Thank you. The thing about buses is quite a regular occurrence that planning committees will condition that a bus runs. A bus is provided. So the Pendragon site had an extension of the e-bus. The Southwest Exeter one had a linking bus between Teambridge and Exeter. So it's a standard thing that planning committees can say you've got to have a bus, and it's got to operate before people move in. So that's it. That's quite straightforward. The second question about help me, the LC whip. Okay, so yes, the LC whip has a cycle route which runs from the north of the south side down, and it has feeder routes that go from east to west across the Valley Park and out through Marsh Barton, because obviously Marsh Barton is a massive employment site, and so walking and cycling to be able to, and people do walk and cycle to work, particularly if, before the buses run at 5 o'clock in the morning. There's lots of people who do walk and cycle, so it's really important that those are good and safe routes. Councillor Atkinson just waved the thing about the travel plan in front of me. I read I think it was Sandtech who did the travel plan report in as one of the supplementary documents that came in. So I obviously have not answered your question. I'll come back to that. Okay, but the travel plan relates just to the site. The travel plan document is all about the people on the site receiving information about how to move around and into the wider community. The travel plan isn't anything to do with infrastructure, and it isn't anything to do with the wider area of Crosshaven Banks outside of this site. So the LC whip does have routes, and there are feeder routes that are identified in the parameter plans. But what I want to, I think, can we have a slide up, Howard? Do you have a slide of the access routes?
Yeah, I'm sorry. The purpose of this moment is to interrogate you on the presentation that you made. I now feel that we've moved off into a vast area which is completely beyond this planning committee and is relating to infrastructure, which is entirely speculative and nothing to do with the conversation that we're having.
Okay.
So I am sorry, no, I'm going to just draw a line under this.
Okay, I just feel that these things are missing and not addressed, and the access you're approving will have big question marks over it, particularly the question about the bridge, because if we don't know where the bridge is going, how can the developer design a path that goes to it?
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments, Councillor Moore.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions relating to the presentation that Councillor Moore gave to us? In that case, I'm going to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
And step down for now. Our next speaker is Councillor Reid. Good evening, Councillor Reid. So again, I'll remind you there is no time limit as to how long you can speak. However, I do request that you are as brief as possible and concise as possible. I will also remind you that obviously your fellow ward councillor has spoken at length, and I ask you particularly to make sure that you don't repeat comments that have already been raised, but come up with some new ones. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like firstly to talk to you all about the issues in relation to the canal and nature. So we heard in Howard's presentation that there's due to be a biodiversity net gain due to current low biodiversity in the area, but that ignores the biodiversity of the canal itself, which is really significant. So particularly I want to talk about the suggestion that was in our objection of a further condition of building heights of no more than 5 stories, as was set out in the SPD, along the whole of the canal southern section. Whoever's going to live in these homes in the future will enjoy unprecedented, beautiful views across the Valley Park over the canal. But we really need to make sure that the canal is protected. If you walk along the canal, as you may well do, as I do, you know that it is a place that offers really important habitat. And the potential for overshadowing with high and continuous massing will cause significant shadowing over the canal and can really affect the ecology, especially as the sun moves during the day around to the south and to the west. So the report states the development will generate low environmental harm, but that's really dependent on the extent of overshadowing of the canal, which is why I suggest that a maximum 5-story height will be really important to have as a condition to protect that. The parameter plan sets out much greater heights and stories along the canal and the whole site overall, and I would ask the committee limits those heights to those as set out in the SPD. Secondly, I want to talk about, as set out in the parameter plan, that the Harbour Master has reported that for safety purposes, in order to bring able to bring out boats from the canal which could be on fire, etc., as we know happens and has happened recently in the estuary, that there needs to be a 12-metre distance between the buildings and the canal. So I think it's really vital that this is adhered to, as is stated in the parameter plan. And thirdly, I want to talk about flooding. The community and the wider city is rightly very concerned about the strategic flood risk assessment. And the report is really not clear about the escape route from the development. So I want us to really be clear what we're voting on tonight, what you are voting on tonight, and to, if necessary, state conditions to make sure that's clearer. So we've got the higher route along the railway shown, but it's not clear if there's going to be a bridge over the railway going to be provided, and it's not clear if the bridge over the canal is going to be provided, because we know that the developer is not committing to this, but we know that the flood risk assessment does mention the bridge over the canal as part of the escape route. So I think it's really vital at this point that the flood infrastructure is really firmly identified and pinned down so that developers of the site know what to provide, and so there can be negotiations over any other funding that's required to ensure that it's put place in a timely way. So we heard in the report that there could be flood risk from the X, but also a flood risk from surface water. And I'm not clear that we've got clarity about where sewage from the development will go and whether this poses a risk as well, and linked with surface water risk. We also heard that we heard from Howe's report that the risk of flood is heightened by climate change. So clarity on this is really, really important. So I would urge that we stipulate that there must be a new bridge over the canal, which would need to be a string bridge. We know it would need to be a string bridge if there is a bridge there in order to retain our heritage harbour. And that there would be a bridge, as is discussed in the flood risk assessment, and that we saw on the drawings, and that developers are required to plan around this and on the basis of this. Within the current conditions, there's a general request for a phasing plan, but there should be a requirement that Section 106 payments for transport, active travel, flood, egress, healthcare and community infrastructure are delivered before occupancy, particularly in relation to transport. We know that if public and active transport routes aren't in place before people move in, habits are formed and it's impossible to change them, which can potentially undermine this development, which has active travel at its heart. We also want to ensure the Section 106 contributions for sports pitch, sports infrastructure, community facility, play facility are requested to be provided on site, and if not, within a few minutes walk. With 982 homes and a neighbouring wider Haven Banks community that's growing, it's really important new community facilities benefit this community. So this means like in the immediate vicinity, Alphington's too far away. For example, when this is about creating a new community infrastructure needs to be absolutely at the heart of community life. So I really urge you to consider what conditions are necessary to ensure that these benefits come from this major development, or to defer until we've got more information and clarification on some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions to the Councillor, please? Councillor Atkinson.
Oh, well, I come back again to the conditions. Condition 57 says no building hereby approved shall be occupied or brought into use until the flood emergency plan for that building is being prepared. So it's here already in the conditions, things that you're advocating. But even though they're here, you still seem to be advocating refusal. And again, it says prior to occupation, bring into use any part or any phase of hereby approved details, arrangements put in place for ongoing management of community space, etc. So I do think you're sort of, it looks like you're trying to find problems that don't exist because they're already addressed in this planning application.
Thank you. So yes, it does say that condition, but the difficulty is, and I'm to be clear, I'm not advocating refusal, and I haven't said that at any point. I've said that what I advocate is that we stipulate some conditions to make sure this development comes out in the right way and benefits the city, because it will be here for generations to come. Yes, it states that, but the difficulty is that we've not got it locked down what those flood rescue routes are. We've not got that locked down, and we've got sort of conflicting information, because you've got a bridge drawn, but we're saying the developer doesn't need to provide a bridge. So I hope that answers your question, Councillor Atkinson, that I'm certainly not suggesting that I want this development to be refused, this application to be refused. I'm suggesting, I think the City of Exeter wants to see this area developed, but it wants to see it developed right, and I'm suggesting that conditions are important to make sure that it is developed right.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Any other questions? Right, I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much indeed, Councillor Reid. Next councillor is Councillor Williams. Good evening, Councillor. Welcome to the committee. I'm sure you know the rules by now.
Thank you, committee. I'm here this evening as portfolio holder for city management, and wish to speak on the waterways element of my portfolio in particular. I was very pleased that Councillor Jobson has already flagged up one important issue, and that is about Gabriel's Wharf and how important it is to us for our maritime operations. Since I put in an application to speak this evening, the Harbour Master and myself have spoken to Howard, the planning officer, and we were very pleased to see condition 68 has now been added, and that has reassured us enormously in terms of our concerns about Gabriel's Wharf and maintaining its critical role in our maritime operations. I thought, whilst I'm here, I am going to set out what I was going to say to you if we hadn't had that particular condition. But I also noted Howard's reply to Councillor Jobson, where he said, we will work with the Harbour Master on the access specification. And I have to say, Howard, that the Harbour Master was out measuring the Gabriel's Wharf area this morning and actually has set out some measurements now on a plan of the requirements, but I'm going to let the committee know what our precise concerns are. Some of you may remember the recent, maybe it's not so recent now, the sinking of the Johnny Eager. That was on the 30th of October 2022, where we had to bring in a very large crane to Gabriel's Wharf to lift out this sunken boat. More recent activity last week saw craning in and out of 4 vessels. We had the Marie Claire trawler, which is 190 tons, and you saw in some of those images that was sunk at Gabriel's Wharf. It's now been lifted out, so that was 190 tons. And craning in was Big Spirit, a 72-foot yacht, and 2 new boats for aquaculture in Scotland, and they were constructed quite near Gabriel's Wharf. So what that involved was bringing in a crane, a 500-ton crane capable of lifting 1,000 tons. That involved 5 articulated lorries with parts of the crane, including the beam, the ballast, and the pads, and that had to be brought in and lined up. So as a minimum in future, we would need to keep 50-metre length of the wharf, so that's the whole length, plus 20-metre extension to the north, and the minimum width area would be 16 metres back from the quay edge, and the minimum width of the north end, and we'd need enough space to turn an articulated lorry minimum of 22 metres. So it's very precise what we need to secure in that particular area. It's important to stress that access to the site is maintained down through Water Lane for heavy articulated vehicles with the capacity to transport extra wide loads through the area with sufficient space for the tractor units and trailer to be turned successful at the end of Water Lane, thus being able to reverse down the wharf in readiness for a vessel to be loaded or unloaded. So with this, with the Marie Claire, we had to crane that out and put it on a trailer to take it out for disposal. Okay, so that's the sort of operation we're talking about. So also there needs to be enough space for suitable mobile crane to sit adjacent to the wharf with outriggers deployed with sufficient space to lower a vessel either onto the land for a boat that is too large to be transported by road, or to be sited so that emergency pairs can be done. The size of the area at the wharf that we would need to successfully carry out this operation is the full length of the quayside with the full width of the quay hard stand and the adjacent road to the curbside next to the existing building. So you can see why it's absolutely vital if we're going to be able to undertake the operations of the waterways. One thing that also an important comment I wanted to draw your attention to on page 24 of the report is that Gabriel's Wharf provides hard standing and reinforced section of canal wall with direct access to the canal. Because you may be wondering, well, maybe we can shift that somewhere else. We can't. It's a reinforced area of the canal, and that's why it's so vital if you're going to bring in these cranes. So with Howard's agreements that we can, there will be negotiation with the Harbour Master. We're very happy with condition, the new condition 68. We support that. Just one other thing I wanted to add. There's been mention of a bridge over the canal, and what we would say there, although it says, if I quote, potentially an additional crossing, this is on page 38, over the canal, this would be welcome and would help to promote and encourage more sustainable ways of travel through the Exeter and further afield. It's not a fantastic thing for the waterways team, because any additional bridge restricts the ease of movement and for our operations. So what I would ask committee to think very carefully of is that, again, we have a condition to ensure that any bridge, should it be constructed, is readily openable so that vessels can pass through it, and not hand cranked either. It would have to be something that you can press a button and it opens pretty quickly. Okay, so thank you, committee.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'm inviting questions from Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Councillor. Just some clarification on condition 68, that you're happy with the wording of it. It just says prior to the occupation or bringing into use of any part or any phase, including or adjacent to Gabriel Wharf, details of the rate, etc., etc. I'm just wondering, this is about occupation and use of it. Are there any issues for that concern you in regard to the construction phase of it, as distinct from the occupation phase of it? Because there's nothing about construction stage. I just wonder if there's likely to be some problems for you in the any construction stage.
I think that what we need to have this area which is clear at all times for us to be able to use, because we know we've had emergencies in the past where the waterways team have had to act pretty swiftly to get access to the canal and to the quay. And I mean, with this recent craning in and craning out, we've actually got another boat that we've towed up to Gabriel's Wharf in readiness, because that has been problematic in partially thinking we've been pumping water out from that one. So we have to anticipate possible emergencies, and we need access at all times, and we know exactly what we need in that area. The Harbour Master has mapped it out, and as Howard has already agreed, he's going to work with the Harbour Master on access specification. So I think we have to leave that to the Harbour Master to fully agree with Howard.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, please? I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor. Our next speaker is an objector or representative of the objectors from Exeter Civic Society, Gert von. Mr. Von Hoff, before you press that, I'm afraid that whereas the councillors have been able to speak at length, you are, I'm afraid, restricted to 3 minutes. My apologies for that in advance, but it is strictly enforced. You may, however, relax, just simply start whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm speaking here tonight on behalf of the Exeter Civic Society in consultation with the Haven Banks Residents Group and the Friends of the Exeter Ship Canal. As explained in detail in our joint written representation from last week, we support the recommendation to approve this outline application, but we have significant reservations about the recommended conditions. I start with viability and affordable housing. As much as I share what Councillor Moore said about the necessity of affordable housing, I think we need to go one step further and look into the viability study. We now, since last Friday or Saturday, have access to the financial viability assessment on request of us, and it's an interesting reading. I'm a layperson in this area, but it's an interesting reading, and I want to explain briefly why. What is the potential price for 35% affordable housing? On the basis of the financial viability assessment, we do not know, as it only allows to calculate the cost of 35% affordable houses in their scenarios 1 and 2, where it comes to about 41 million as deficit. If the third scenario shows a profit of 36 million, the potential funding gap for 35% affordable housing inclusion might only be in the region of 5 million. We need comparable figures for this case, so we need a kind of fourth scenario, which takes the scenario with affordable housing into this third scenario environment in order to have comparable figures and to know what we are talking about. So similar to Councillor Moore, we in any case oppose a suggestion to remove affordable housing at this outstage because there is no necessity to do this. Councillor Moore has explained that. As for the wider transport issue, we fully support this because solely concentrating on flows within the development will have a detrimental impact on both the development and the neighboring areas. And we have been proactive in this from the prospectus onwards, which was 2022. And we are surprised in talks with the developer. This was always an important point, and the developer responded positively to this. But we think there is collaboration between the different partners necessary in order to get this in place now and not in the future. Building parameter heights, I don't say any. Okay. Yeah, fine.
Right, thank you. Okay, so let's ask questions. I'll start with Councillor Ketchin.
I was intrigued by the last point you were going to make because I've no idea what you were going to say. So I'm going to ask you. I've sort of banged a little drum about the maximum heights and sort of said they seem generous to my mind. The Exeter Civic Society, I think, has a sort of gifted group of experts in buildings and the likes. And do they have a view on, you know, the maximum building heights, and if they are overly generous or if they are sort of typical of a scheme like this?
Thanks for the question. I think we completely share the problem of overshadowing of the most southern buildings, overshadowing of the canal. The other concern we have is where the new buildings will neighbor existing buildings, that the SPD regulation which is in place will be fully followed, because it says it shouldn't be more than 2 stories. But if the story height differs, as the ward councillors before me have pointed out, then what does this mean, 2 stories difference? So I think we need clarification on this in order to reassure that there is something built which we all can sign off as acceptable and as a positive feature. I say again, we are not against this development. We're fully behind, and we are very appreciative of the developer being so open in all these things and providing so much insight at the different stages, so much consultation, productive consultation. But I think we really need to cement these questions we have now in order to produce a safe future for the planning and reduce times at reserve matter stages, because what we clarify here now at this stage will lead to shorter, potentially to shorter work phases in the next stages.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? No. None. Any other hands? No. So thank you very much indeed, Mr. Ronhoff. Thank you for your time. I'm now calling on Mr. Andy Wilkins, speaking on behalf of Water Lane DMC. Welcome, Mr. Wilkins. Again, under the rules of our committee, you have 3 minutes, starting whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, members and officers. We thank the case officer for the thorough report for this outline application that's before you tonight. This evening will hopefully provide a watershed moment for the city that will see the delivery wheels start to move to deliver much needed housing on what is a sustainable, allocated brownfield site within the Water Lane regeneration area. We have worked collaboratively and exhaustively with all stakeholders with the vision to bring forward a low carbon, low car, mixed use scheme that meets the needs of Exeter in the 21st century. These proposals work within the parameters established by the Council's SPD and have been reviewed by the Independent Design Review Panel on 2 occasions. The panel applauded the proposal, and I quote, "The vision that underlies this scheme is to create a distinctive low carbon and low carb waterside neighbourhood that is well connected to its surroundings and the city." And it concluded that it sees Water Lane as potentially not only transformative of its sites and neighbourhood, but also an exemplar and model for future schemes close to the city centre in Exeter and elsewhere. They were struck by the level of shared ambition between us and the council. They identified a rare collective will to bring the scheme forward and labelled the scheme as being exemplar. By creating homes that the city greatly needs on this brownfield site, it helps to protect Exeter's greenfield setting whilst encouraging a non-car dependent lifestyle. This site is about as brown as a brownfield site can get, and the cost for delivery is significant. Thankfully, we're experienced with brownfield regeneration schemes and have a roadmap to realise the site's delivery. We commit to continue working with the stakeholders in order to achieve this vision. Where there are proposals on brownfield sites like this, it's nigh on impossible to sign up for the delivery of all items at day one. The site assembly is complex and very costly. It comprises an old contaminated industrial site, including the once noxious meat rendering facility, with an old but vital high pressure gas main that needs relocating. The application will provide many Section 106 contributions as detailed in the report. We understand that affordable housing provision is a critical issue. This is more straightforward to deliver on greenfield sites, but less so on sites of this complexity. This application provides for review mechanisms at key milestones. The affordable market is particularly fragile at the moment, even on greenfield sites, owing to a lack of available funding. This market will change and will in turn assist with the provision of affordable homes on this site. Nothing's off the table, and the review mechanism facilitates this process. Whilst we are just applicants, we fully acknowledge that the importance of this application goes way beyond its red line. This is an exciting moment that will see the delivery of much needed homes in a truly sustainable manner. I would urge you to allow us to take the next steps together and to help deliver the exemplar regeneration scheme that is proposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilkins. Councillors, I'll start off with Councillor Mitchell first of all, and then Ralston.
Thank you. I just want to come back to this viability issue, which you've been listening for the last several hours, and it's a key issue for many of us, because you talk about the need for housing, etc. Well, there's also a need for affordable and social housing in Exeter, and particularly in a city, adjacent city centre site, rather than people being forced to go onto the outskirts of the city. In our latest report, which I assume you've seen, a preliminary to the report from about the viability study, there is a wish on your part, obviously, to get outline planning permission, because then you can proceed with financiers and others to see how you bring the site along. And I don't think there's any issues with that. But the issue of the wording here is a positive resolution in favour of the scheme in principle, as they're writing, and subject to an agreement of an appropriate S106 obligation, including a viability review mechanism in due course. Now, having been on, also it then goes in the last paragraph to point out that the modelling used to get the viability report is not one that Exeter would have used on other sites in the area. So one person's viability report is somebody else's viability report. We can only work on the viability report that was presented, all 60 pages of it, to us to look at. So my question is, in relation to an adjacent site that goes on the canal, I was somewhat surprised 18 months ago when the developer immediately said, yes, you can have 35% affordable housing. No argument, it was there, 35%. Now, we all understand that as the market changes and costings changes on the site, there's no problem about the developer coming back, as we've had recently at our last meeting, coming back and to alter the arrangements in order to lower that because the viability has changed. So what I can't understand is why you appear to be happy, or it appears that you would be happy to have a condition that allows for reviews of affordable housing, but you don't appear to be happy to have affordable housing written in, which then does allow you to have reviews at any stage as we go through the process. So could you elaborate? Thank you.
If I can pick up on that. Look, as developers, I think it's fair to say that whilst you won't necessarily anticipate this being the answer, we welcome affordable housing provision because it helps to fund. You get a lot of money on day one, which helps with the cash flow and the rate of return from a project. So we don't run away from it as a matter of, as a matter of case. But what we have to do in order to spend the significant amounts of money on this project that's required to get the delivery wheels moving is know that we have got a viable or a nearly viable site that can actually, hopefully, if economic cycles improve, then we're going to be able to meet the needs and the requirements of the policy. But if it stays as it is today, and we've got a 35% affordable housing requirement, we've got a massive shortfall. So what's the incentive for us to go and spend another £1 on trying to get to the get-go and get past that green light of starting work on site? So we've got a lot of work to do, and we need to see that there is a roadmap available to us that we can go along that process, and we're very happy with the review mechanisms. It's standard practice for brownfield sites like this to have those review mechanisms and the checks and balances in place to deal with the economic cycles that we go through.
The point was made that by us not conditioning an SO 106 the affordable housing element, we have problems later on of resurrecting that or discussing that. And you're saying that isn't
I
true.
don't believe that's the case. I think the mechanism proposed by the officers and the condition opposed, I think it's all absolutely standard, and it will make sure that the checks and balances are in place, that if it is viable for us to deliver the affordable housing, then it gets delivered.
Condition that then.
So thank you. I just asked for there to be no comments from the back, please. Thank you. Who else to speak? I've got Councillor Ralston next.
Thank you, Chair. You've heard this evening about this requirement for there to be a limitation to the building heights. I know you won't be able to give us a definitive answer, but maybe a ballpark. By roughly how many units would it reduce the application if they were all dropped down to this 5-storey height? How much would it cut off of that 900 and something figure?
I can't answer that in any detail today, and I doubt the architect who sat with us could actually answer it in detail without going away and doing the exercise. But we then roll back to the fact that, look, the building heights proposed are within the parameters of the SPD that the City Council has adopted. And that's been taken into account in the landscape visual impact assessment that's been carried out.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Patrick next.
Hi, thank you for coming to talk to us today. So you mentioned that this review process throughout a project is, standard by your experience. So do you have an example of a project that you've worked on where there has been a review process like this and affordable housing has been delivered?
Yes, we have delivered affordable housing on brownfield sites where initially it didn't look from the viability point of view to be viable for it to be delivered. But unfortunately, we do live in the housing market is very cyclical. Boom and bust cycles that we go through. That's why it's there to capture that moment. If you're taking a site through the planning and it's pretty down and like it is today, and then in 3 months' time or 3 years' time, when we're actually on site delivering, why shouldn't we have to pay our dues? It's just the process. And
that's heartening to hear, and that mentality is great to hear. So what sort of percentages have you been able to deliver on those sorts of projects?
I'm thinking about Harbury Cement Works, where we got to 19% here to deliver.
Cement works, that's obviously a tricky
brownfield site, lots of complex problems. But again, what tenure provision are you applying? Because 10% of a certain split in 10 years could be perceived to be more valuable to Exeter than it may be if the tenure provision was instead of 80-20, 70-30 or 60-40. So there's lots of factors that can go into providing a perceived higher percentage, but is it actually delivering the right kind of affordable housing that is needed in Exeter? So there's lots of processes that we'll go through to make sure that the optimal solution is reached.
Mr. Wilkie, remind you. Thank you very much. And I have Councillor Asvashian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. It sounds like you've done a really good job at working with the community, which is nice to hear from a developer. My main concern was the talk of biodiversity, and it was brought up by Councillor Moore, I think, or possibly Councillor Reid, sorry, about the South Bank and losing biodiversity within the actual river itself. Is that something that you can clarify and also maybe expand upon a little bit, please?
If I had my ecologist here, I'm sure he could talk to you for a long time about it. I can't give you that level of detail insofar as the BNG is concerned and all of that. I think it was touched upon that, you know, the site's obviously got a low BNG value in its existing state. It's going to be improved. We're going to do what we can where we can. And I'd go again back to the point about, look, the SPD set parameters for story heights for the site as a whole, for the regeneration area as a whole, and we're following that. So, thank you.
And Councillor Ketchin.
Thanks. I've got two questions. And my first question is, can you guess what my question will be about, having heard me already? So I'll go for the second question. First question is, I think Councillor Ralston and Patrick sort of alluded to, or sorry, as Fashion alluded to, sort of the interplay between building height and nature, and then I think Councillor Reid also tried to tie it into overshadowing on the council at the south end in particular, which I think is 5 stories, if I've got that right. The SPD, as you said, is 2.5 meters per story, but the building parameter document is about 22 meters for 5 stories. It's quite a big disparity. It's 50% greater. Would you be happy if the planning committee sort of talks about a condition on that particular part of the scheme to sort of be tied to the Water Lane SPD, which is 2.5 meters per story, or the 17.5 meters, which is in Howard's document? Howard's shaking his head. The reason I bring it up, or I'll ask the question in a different way, if you don't mind, is in what circumstances is it required of a development to need four meters per story? You know, you're a developer, you've done other schemes, you've done other schemes. We know that the drawings that were given tonight are only indicative. You're not beholden to them. And in fact, the ceiling is actually the diagrams that Howard showed, which are much higher. So you can understand my concern, because I've been at this committee before where we've been tied to previous outline planning permissions and the developers pushed to the max. And you know, you sound like an engaged developer, but we want to tie this in and tie any future developer that it might be sold onto in as well.
I think the reference to the 4 meters or 4.5 meters is a bit of a red herring, because that's only at ground floor level. So you need the additional floor to ceiling height at ground floor for commercial uses. Okay. I think when you go above the first floor, then you know our floor to ceiling heights are, or sorry, our floor heights or story heights are 3.3 meters, which is standard real, you know, from a building point of view of high-rise developments. And again, I go back to the point that as far as I'm concerned and aware, we are building within the story heights established by the SPD documentation. So if we're within the SPD documentation, how can we really be criticised for the proposals that are before you?
Can I just clarify then? Because are we saying the first floor? Sorry, are we saying that the first, and this maybe is a technical point, and we can maybe just clear a lot of this up. The first floor, we understand, won't be habitable for a lot of the buildings because, you know, it's a floodplain, we get that. And that's 4 meters, and, you know, I get that as well. But we're talking about 5-story buildings. We're just talking about 5-story buildings that include that ground floor level. So it's not the ground level of 4 meters and then another 5 stories on top, is it? Can we just clarify that? Because that is the only way I can understand the way these heights add up. The disparity between 17.5 meters and 22.5 meters.
I can assure you the director will be summing up after our short break, and it will be including those sort of guidelines to you. Yeah. Are there any other questions for Mr. Wilkins? I'm not seeing any. No, so I really do thank you very much indeed for your time, and again appreciate your engagement with us. Right, we have been sitting for 2.5 hours. I suggest that we have a 10-minute break, so we will be resuming at 8:15.
regards to parameter plan heights over estimate. And I know there's again, the story heights were introduced. Actually, we were consulted for the SPD's story height. You can't have a story height for the floor of 2.5 metres. You'd be crouching and telling you floor with a slab and floor to the surface. But anyway, that by the by. What you see, with all the documents, there's not a single document that I'm asking for, which tells you the society that's because it's the application. That's the whole. Yes, it's an outline application. It's not this is what I'm saying exactly. You're absolutely right in the sense that though we can't
Yes, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If I can call you to order, please. Councillors, if you can take your places, I'm grateful. Thank you very much indeed. Hopefully you've enjoyed that little break. We now go into the second half, if you like. I call on the director to make his summation.
Thank you, Chair. And as you can imagine, with such a detailed and complex application, there are a few items that I would just like to clarify and help the committee with. There's also a number of issues that have been picked up in the representations that I'd like to come back to as well, as you would expect. So to begin with, as you know, we only really arrange these special one-off meetings when there's a very significant application. This application is probably one of the most important that this committee has considered for many years. It's a response in a way to a commitment that was made by the council back in 2005 when it was first looked at and allocated development for Water Lane. So 20 years on, here we are with the first large-scale planning application that's been before you to be considered. So it does have the potential to be transformative for Water Lane and the people who already live there. There is a community down there in Water Lane which we're very aware of. But the proposal also has strategic benefits potentially for Exeter as a whole. So why is Water Lane so important then for us? Well, it's the largest mixed-use brownfield site allocated in the new Exeter plan, and this application covers a major part of that allocation. Water Lane's also a top priority for regeneration for the council and has been for many years, as I've explained. And it's also this flagship for the Livable Exeter initiative. And I want to thank officers and my team who've worked hard over the past 3 years, working closely with the applicants and a range of government agencies to get the application for your consideration tonight. During that same period, a different team in the policy area has worked on a new development framework and design code for Water Lane. That's followed extensive engagement also with landowners, but really importantly with local people. That was adopted last year, particularly for moments like this. So you have a detailed set of policy guidance to help you consider these sorts of applications. So that's partly, all of that work is partly really explained by the many challenges that this application has to address. This site is extraordinary, even by brownfield standards, and it's the complexity involved in putting together a deliverable scheme that I think many people have looked at tonight and raised questions about. If it's successful, though, it will breathe new life into the area and help regenerate the canal basin and the quay. And of course, with such large-scale proposals, it can have a major contribution to the city as well, particularly addressing our housing needs. So over 1,000 homes goes a long way towards addressing our housing needs. So for that reason, this application is also very important for the upcoming examination for the Exeter plan. A resolution to grant this evening would provide strong evidence to an inspector that our local plan is sound. And it will also give confidence, as you've heard, to developers to want to come and invest in our city. So there is a lot at stake this evening. We've had a lot of conversations about the nature of the application. It is in outline, with only access being considered in detail. However, there are these parameters, these 6 parameter plans that are really important, and they will form part of the planning permission should you be minded to grant outline permission. So those parameters are basically just a set of principles, and they provide a framework for which you then to consider more detailed proposals as they come forward at the next stages. What's really important about those parameters is that they're attempting to demonstrate that there is a scheme that can be delivered within the confines of your local plan policies. So as long as you're satisfied that those parameters do meet with your existing planning policies in both the emerging plan but also the adopted plan, then you should be recommending approval. If you don't believe that, if you don't believe the parameters set within those policies, then that's a different conversation. So we've also heard a lot of discussion about infrastructure and the coordination and delivery of infrastructure. So there's a few important elements to that to understand. So the applicant has set out infrastructure elements which are needed for this particular development, and these will be secured through the Section 106 agreement. And that establishes a very important principle, which is that the development that you're seeing tonight isn't reliant on other land coming forward. Having said that, the SPD does set out a broader framework for infrastructure delivery, and that encourages collaboration between landowners on a range of statutory bodies. So this is actually already happening. So outside of the planning application process, your officers are talking to a range of landowners, they're talking to each other, and they're all talking to people like Homes England and the Environment Agency. So there's a lot of potential for further work to be done, as I say, beyond simply dealing with a planning application. So the technical report and the presentation provide a summary of all the key issues, and obviously I'm not going to go back over all of those, but I did want to highlight some of the topics that have been raised in the discussion in the representations. But before I do that, there's another important principle about setting conditions. A lot of the representations have been about wanting to change the conditions. So as you can imagine, over that 3-year period, officers have spent a long time with the applicant and with statutory bodies working out what the right set of conditions should be for this application based on what we've submitted, what has been submitted. So I did kind of find it interesting that a lot of the representations we've heard started by saying, well, we don't object to the scheme, but we want to change the conditions. And the way in which those representations wanted to change the conditions was effectively to change the application. So as an example, reducing the parameter plans and reducing the heights in those, you're effectively changing the application. So that's a conversation about whether you believe that the parameters are appropriate or not. As I've said previously, if you believe that they're compliant with our policies, then that's fine. If you don't think that, that's a different conversation. But about whether you change conditions, that's probably beyond what those conditions could be done. Applying conditions which change the nature of the planning application fundamentally means you're not accepting the proposal before you. I'd just like to say as well that it's very pleasing that with Gabriel's Wharf, I understand now that the condition has been applied, that issue has now been satisfied. A couple of other important issues. Flooding, we've heard a lot about, and I think the clue is in the name, Water Lane. It is mainly within flood zone 3, which is the highest risk. But there's been a technical assessment, the Environment Agency don't object. All of the housing is at first floor level, so away from danger. And there is flood resilience in mind when these buildings come forward as reserve matters. So a lot of safeguards are in place already. City Council also has an important role as the emergency planning authority, and it does need to consider what measures need to be taken to protect people if there is a flood. Your officers think that's best achieved through an additional measure, which is to provide a safe route for people from Water Lane in the event of a flood. That mechanism would also benefit all of the existing residents that live in Water Lane. So it hasn't been worked out yet, but there is a strategy. That strategy is about taking people away over the river into a safe space if there was serious flooding. Now, the Environment Agency is saying that isn't going to be needed for another 25 or 30 years, based on the modelling that they've done. So there's time to find that detailed solution. Coming back to my earlier point about collaboration between landowners, that's some of the work that we'll need to do. So for the time being, there will be a financial contribution to that, a bit like the contribution that we're seeking for the school. So the primary school won't be delivered through this scheme, but it will make a contribution to delivering the school on another part of Water Lane. So the same principle applies. Now, we've talked about access and movement. All I wanted to say there really was that the applicant has worked out an access strategy that's been worked out with Devon Highways. They've sat down with them, they've worked it through. It'll be coming through that Tan Lane area, and they'll build a new road to facilitate that Foundry Lane. What that does, apart from meeting with the SPD design code requirements, it means that there's connectivity. It means that you can afford not to have cars along Water Lane, additional cars along Water Lane or Haven Road, because most of the cars will be routed away from that. And that frees up the scheme to be connected, to be pedestrian friendly, and to benefit people who want to walk and cycle. Of course, Section 106 obligations come into that as well, and there's a whole package of Section 1 obligation that will build along that and provide additional works. I'm near the end of my summation, but design, again, received a lot of attention this evening about design, particularly again around the parameter plans. It's worth just emphasising again that the specific parameter plan on height does clearly mark out that heights are at a maximum, and that the detailed design should be guided by design codes that are in the SPD. So in other words, set a maximum, it's not a target. And when those schemes come in at reserve matters stage, we've got the SPD and we've got the parameter plans to use to guide what those buildings look like, their form, their massing, their design. So there's a lot. The key point is you have, as a planning committee, because we'll be bringing these reserve matters back to you, you'll have a lot of control over what those buildings end up like beyond what you've seen tonight, which is quite crude in terms of parameters, but it sets the principle. Okay. By the way, I should say as well that within the SPD itself, it actually allows for, in some places, 8 and 9 stories, so beyond what the applicant is actually proposing. There's also an element that officers negotiated previously when there was a 12-story element. That no longer is shown on the plans. Couple of final points really on affordable housing. I was asked a question in the break about this, about how do we get to this affordable housing conundrum. So there is no provision being made currently in the Section 106 Normally, that's where you would see affordable housing, not in conditions. That's due to the exceptional costs. We've heard about the many problems that need to be dealt with in Water Lane: flooding, there's the high pressure gas main, there's contamination. We could go on. Your planning policies do allow for reductions in affordable housing, depending on that viability. I think you'll also be aware, because you've had the training on this, that the recent work done for the Exeter plan, also based on viability evidence that the council commissioned, does show that there's a reduction for brownfield development to a significant degree compared to greenfield development, and that's because of the challenges around affordability. But the last point I want to make on this is really important. There is a review mechanism built into the, and it is into the 106 agreements, not a planning condition. There is a review mechanism, which means that we can revisit that at each stage of the reserved matters. And along that journey, that provides the opportunity that we need for the developer to work with us, work with Homes England, to look at how they can bridge that funding gap. That 10 million funding gap, it is an incentive, if you like, to work with Homes England to get grants to provide the affordable housing. So there's an absolute requirement, but it's also an incentive. It makes sense for the developer to want to do that and work with us on that. Last final point is about housing supply and the planning balance. We've not really touched on this too much, but we don't currently have a 5-year land supply, and normally that's a really big issue, because it means you have to adopt what's called a tilted balance. In this case, however, where your officers recommended approval, not because of the tilted balance, it's because we think the benefits of the scheme, actually, irrespective of the presumption in favour of development, really demonstrate an approval. So the scheme, we're saying as officers, is acceptable, not having regard to that 5-year land supply. So to conclude, some really simple points. This is a brownfield site in a highly sustainable location. Your officers have made a technical assessment, and that tells us that this would meet current and future policies, and it would also satisfy the design codes, or have the potential to satisfy the design codes in the Water Lane SPD. It would make a major single contribution to meeting Exeter's housing needs, so it's very important for the future local plan and whether that will be adopted. Section 106 doesn't include any affordable housing, but we are working alongside Homes England, our partner housing associations and landowners to deliver. We want to deliver social housing in particular down in Water Lane. There are numerous controlling mechanisms for that, and to ensure that reserved matters that come forward are acceptable and meet City Council, yours and the Council's expectations to deliver the vision for Water Lane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. We're now moving into the debate stage. I will remind members that I am requesting that you literally only have one go. So please, I hope you have been making notes as I have, as you've been going along, so that you have an understanding of what you want to contribute, and also perhaps any further questions that you want to throw up into the air and see if somebody will catch them. So I'm opening it now to the floor. Councillor Mitchell, you are always so quick on the draw. Off you go, Councillor Mitchell.
As the officers have said, this is a very complex and very important development. I haven't heard anybody around the table this evening suggest that we're opposed to this development or don't want the development to take place. But at the same time, we've got to get it right for the future of Exeter and the residents who are going to live there. As has already been stated, it is not necessarily our job to rewrite conditions. We're not planning officials in that sense. But I think some of us have got concerns about some of them, which we'd like the officers to take on board and consider. If I just go through the 3 or 4 I've got here, which will be my contribution. One is the affordable housing element. I read the section about there will be reviews at set periods, etc. But I believe it is a policy of this council to support affordable housing on large sites. I believe that principle should be embedded within the planning conditions. I don't think we necessarily need to set a figure on it because it can be done with the reviews as it comes along. So in other words, I don't think we should enforce a situation. It's got to be 30 or 25 or 18% at this stage. We can set a commitment, a wish on the part of this council that we wish to see affordable housing on the site, and it will be subject to regular reviews. That I think enables the developer to do what he wishes, but also I think meets our commitment that as a council we believe in affordable housing, not as an afterthought or you'll get some if you're lucky sort of thing on that one. So that's the point on affordable housing. On the point that Councillor Williams mentioned in the late condition 68, I did raise the issue, and again, it's just a matter of concern that it didn't mention anything about Gabriel's Wharf during the construction period. It was only after the completion of building, and I think there could be quite a bit of interruption to their ability to deal with situations during the construction period. So I would hope that the officers might consider amending their wording on that one to ensure it covers the entire period of when work starts on the site until occupation. Parameter plans, well, we've been with parameter plans before, have we not, and whatever. But then again, we're linked here to the SBD, we're linked to heights, etc. We've got the assurances that these are maximum heights that we're told that, and in some cases, this developer is not going to those heights. And we've got 6 various parameter plans here. I'm reassured by what the officers said, that there is some latitude for them to make professional judgments on what is best and come back to us at that stage. And lastly, I'd like to thank the developer for the amount of consultation they've done with the community and the work they've had to put in, because this is a high-risk development from their point of view. And I would hope they would continue to consult with the local community and ward councillors and others as this development progresses, because we want it to be a development that we can be proud of in Exeter. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Councillor Jobson.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who's made a presentation this evening. I think they've all been very interesting. Really following on from Councillor Mitchell, I'm not sure whether we need to vary conditions with regard to Gabriel's Wharf or to the affordable housing. I think in the past we've added things like informatives. I will be corrected if I am wrong, but that in the case of the affordable housing, I think there should be a clear commitment within the papers that Exeter City Council is committed to providing affordable and social housing, and we acknowledge the difficulties of a brownfield development, but that we are committed to reviewing the element of affordable or social housing at each and every element, each and every review. It means it is there in black and white. It shows the residents of Exeter that we are concerned about the fact that nobody on the housing waiting list will be able to move into one of these water lane places as it currently stands, and that's contrary to Exeter's commitment. So that's the first one, and it may be that rather than a condition, because the developer himself has shown a keenness reading the material to have ongoing reviews. And the second one is Gabriel's Wharf, and I am concerned that when you read condition 68, which is good as far as it goes, but again, it doesn't deal with the issue of pre-work done on site, necessary for demolition of buildings and the rest of it. And following the presentation from Councillor Williams, it is absolutely clear that Gabriel's Wharf and the access to it needs to be kept open 24/7, 365 days a year. And if that means a little bit of difficulty for people doing construction work, well then so be it. But you couldn't have an emergency at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning and discover that the road had been dug up and wasn't available. So again, I think there needs to be a little bit more clarity. And finally, there is a huge problem in this, and that is there seems to be some little discrepancy about the number of stories being permitted. We hear from Councillor Moore that she says the SPD says 4 stories, 5 stories, 6 stories. Director has said could go up to 9 stories. The parameter plan is now saying 5 stories, 7 stories, 8 stories. The heights appear to be a little different. It all ties in with how much shadowing, how much impact it will have on the existing community there. So please, when this comes back again, can we have some absolute clarity on whether it's the SPD document that we are following or whether there is now a novel parameter plan building height which is marginally different? Because it's very difficult for this committee if you're looking at two or three different documents and you get the impression that there's 2 or 3 different heights. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's absolutely no doubt to anyone in this room that this council is committed to providing affordable housing, subject to what we can get away with under the current planning rules. And it's very clear, given this is a brownfield site, where there are viability plans, that if we were to insist upon a certain amount of affordable housing tonight, development could not go ahead because it couldn't meet the viability standards. And I have listened to what the developers said, and I was very happy that they would review and our officers would keep under review the relationship with Homes England. As we know, there's no current affordable housing funding available that's been released for anybody at this time. So I'm not sure that any affordable housing would be going through unless they've got something in their coffers. Am I right in my understanding that, any conditions attached to this have got to be enforceable? So we couldn't attach a condition, and I'm asking officers to clarify this. We couldn't attach a condition that they provide X number of affordable housing, because we couldn't enforce that because they could appeal against that, and because it doesn't meet the viability standards, and that it, other than what Councillor Jobson has said, we should have it in the conditions. Oh no, was it Councillor Mitchell? Whereas what we've got, as I understand, is a commitment through Section 106 agreement to continue negotiations on the development of affordable housing. And I'm just asking officers to comment on if my understanding of why we're going down that route is correct. Then the other points that I wanted to make, because it was raised by Councillor Moore, that the active travel, the vehicle access, public transport didn't actually link up. But I've looking at the slides that you presented today, page 38, 39 and 40, and all of them show linking up to active travel on LC WIP and bus services, and there is a commitment to bus services in this. So I would just welcome officers' comment on whether my understanding that all of those matters which Councillor Moore said weren't included in the current proposal are in fact included in them. Thank you.
So the council is right to highlight the contributions being made by this development. The plans that do link and show travel routes for public transport through the site in accordance with the SPD. And that, it is the job of officers to coordinate with various developers and landowners across this piece to deliver the SPD.
Thank you, Howard. Councillor Patrick.
You didn't answer my other question.
The section 106 is the right place for this to be, rather than informative, which is just for information. The condition needs to meet the test for conditions, but the legal agreement.
So I know we're not really meant to be asking questions again, but so it's really clear that there is that the commitments there. It's in the 106 agreement. There's a review mechanism to allow us to consider viability at each stage. So there's no need for an informative. It's there in the 106. It's in black and white. We've discussed it 3 or 4 times this evening. So the commitment is there. That otherwise, why have the review mechanism? And the developer is happy with that review mechanism.
Thank you. Just before I move on to Councillor Patrick, I just want to remind us we're in the debate stage. So what I'm expecting of you is a contribution into the debate, perhaps expressing your own views and opinions on where you are in it, rather than going back to where we were in 2.5 hours ago and asking officers questions. Thank you. Councillor Patrick.
Thank you. A lot of what I was going to say has already been said. So I'm just going to say that I support this application and that obviously, you know, I think we all know our commitment to affordable housing, but we all recognise the exceptional nature of this particular brownfield site. So we're not setting a precedent here. We're not saying to every brownfield developer that we're not looking for affordable housing. We're recognising this is an exceptionally difficult site. As for the sort of height of the building overshadowing part of the canal, I do understand the concerns there, but you know what we're looking at is a development of, you know, overall, if we take it as the whole sort of development, it's vastly improved, a vast improvement on what we currently have already, which is a very built over, neglected, run down environment with very little biodiversity. So I think overall, you know, on balance, I will be supporting it in full.
Thank you, Councillor Patrick. Councillor Ralston and Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think we all know as councillors certainly since I was elected in May, we've had a lot of discussion about brownfield sites and that they do come with much more issues and that we needed to be prepared for that coming forward. And you know, we're in the situation now where that's happened. I'd also like to echo Ian's praise for the team that's been involved in this because, yeah, as I've been delving in and reading everything, it's made me realise just how much work has gone into this, and I think that we shouldn't undervalue that at all. So thanks for preparing us so well for this. I do think we need to think about the aspect of Gabriel's Wharf in the construction bit, possibly. I don't know if it is possible to maybe add something into condition 16, which is the construction method statement, that whether we could have that that would then become a queue on the list. But for me, that would seem the right place for it to sit, because that's usually where, for any project, big or small, the plans are in place about how the site is managed, and it feels like that's part of the site management, just so that we can make sure that we have that access if there is an emergency on the waterways in the construction site. But other than that, I will be supporting this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Ralston. I have Councillor Ketchin next.
I think it's been a good debate tonight, and the presentation set the scene, and then people really sort of put some thoughts to this. My little bugbear has been about building heights, and it was very helpful to hear the developer sort of say, you know, we're looking at a standard of basement of 4 and then 3 1/3 meters per height, and that sort of left me wondering, well, where's this disparity? And I think just sort of my contribution is, I think the disparity seems to be in the roofing structures, which sort of add on another 5 meters. I may be corrected, not, but I'm certainly not going to ask the officer to clarify that, but he's allowed, if he's chosen to do so spontaneously. And you know, I mean, some of these buildings typically have plant rooms in the roof architecture. Some will be gable ended. If we look across the current sort of canal seen a lot of gable-ended sort of buildings, and that's the sort of the look of it. I think, you know, if I was sort of going to try and push my point and look to sort of, I think this is a relationship. The council's in a relationship with the developer. In all relationships, you know, you go in with a feeling of love, but sometimes you have your little fights, but hopefully you come out stronger for it. And I think if I was going to sort of have my little tussle, it would be to say that down at the southern end, maybe we should be asking for flat roof structures, and then that might stop the overshadowing on the canal. And that would be a small thing to ask, because obviously, you know, the styling and the setting of the whole thing needs to be right. And I'm not an architect here to do it, but there's you know, as I say, in this relationship, there are compromises or to be had that little nuances that add to the lasting embrace of a wonderful relationship. And so I think something around the southern end, and maybe if the roof structures could be modified, or there's some point around that might go a way to improving the scheme without causing any lasting harm. Enhancement, perhaps.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Paul.
To Councillor Ketch. Can I just clarify that we are looking at outline planning, so any nuances around the actual buildings would be what would come back in reserved matters, so there would be potential opportunity for that in the future, but not at the moment. Is that correct? I'm getting so lots of nods. Thank you.
That's my understanding as well, but what I'm trying to explain is that the maximum heights are set by those expectations, and the expectations are design the buildings, giving them freedom and scope to push up. And if we so feel that in a certain section there's a nuance to it, then perhaps the overall scheme has to include that, not dictating the building style, but perhaps putting in that limit, which then means that the architects have to work within a different mindset and make that work.
Thank you, Councillor Ketch. And Councillor Paul. Is it?
Yeah, I just had sort of three main thoughts, I think. One is that this is, like, clearly we can all see with our eyes when we go down to the quay that this is a place that I think sometimes when you have these applications in front of you and there's not sort of much car parking, you might be a little bit skeptical that it's all going to work out. But with this one, we know that people voluntarily active travel to the quay and into the city centre and to St David's station, and it's all a very connected place to be putting places for people to live. It's delivering a large number of housing units. I'm particularly excited about the fact that supporting this application will actually strengthen our position in the longer run on affordable housing, because we'll be able to be under our local plan, and that will then, you know, and also just to say, you know, people, we do need it. It's not just that sort of, you know, the government is sort of driving us to deliver houses. We actually have people that need to live in houses, and you know, that I think is a positive, that we're delivering houses for people to live in of itself, and excited about this helping us to deliver on the local plan, and then also I just also wanted to say that I'm also really pleased that we're going to be delivering some economic units and providing jobs for people, and sort of, you know, some new sort of boost to the local economy as well. So yeah, I think there are some good things coming out of this.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else? In that case, I'd like to make my contribution, if I may. I want to echo the thanks that have been offered to the officers that have all been involved in the last 3 years of this negotiation to achieve this project that is 20 years in the making. This is an extraordinarily challenging and profoundly difficult site to develop. And so there are several mitigating reasons why we have to accept the lack of an immediate amount of affordable housing. To me, the number of stories and the heights and things like that are almost irrelevant compared to massing. Massing for me is going to be really crucial. And I've heard that this is going to be a reserved matter. I've heard that there will not be solid blocks right the way up to the edge there. It's going to be designed, and there's going to be increments. There's going to be separation gaps between the buildings, all of which hopefully will mitigate all of our concerns when it comes back to the reserve stage, and we can really look at the way in which this has been put together. I think that sufficient has been left to us, unlike other occasions when we've come round here and literally we've had everything prescribed to us by the outline, and all we can decide is what colour fascia it's going to have. I think that the potential for the design, the appearance is going to be suitable and relevant to the setting it's in. I'm satisfied that these conditions in place reassure that should the development viability allow affordable housing, it will be delivered, and there may be delivered through other mechanisms. So my conclusion is that I support the recommendation. And I'm now asking, are there anybody else who wishes to make a comment, preferably something that hasn't been heard before, but if not, I'll take it to Councillor Atkinson. I'll get Mitchell first and then Atkinson.
Amendment, or I'm going to vote. The director has talked about the viability review and it being built into the S106. Am I right in thinking the reference to that is on page 93 of the report, where we've got a list of recommendations at 18, and on a number of bullet points, and one bullet point says viability review. Then we've got a number of pages that identify S106 conditions. Viability review isn't there or listed. When I come back to the point that we mentioned about viability review, I have to go back to page 88, where it's in the last paragraph of a paragraph on viability about the consent. And I'm just wondering, how can I be assured that that is in the S106 when I've got it in the body of the report, but not listed under the S106 conditions, just got the words viability review? So I just want some clarification on that, so I know it is embedded in the officer's recommendation.
Just because the section 106 matters are things that go into a legal agreement, which is signed. The conditions are conditions attached to the planning consent itself. So they are separate things. Section 106 matters in the legal agreement, which is where we are saying the viability review needs to be.
Yep.
And then the conditions don't deal with it because it's in the 106. It should never be in both. Things either in one or the other, and section 106 is the right place.
Yeah, I get that. But I was saying in your report, we've got the word viability review on page 93 as an item.
As a recommendation. So part of the
but
recommendation.
No descriptor of what it's about, just the word.
It's heads of terms. So the full terms will be in the agreement.
Yeah. The only reference to the terms is on page 88. And I'm assuming what you're saying is what is an 88 will be what carries forward to the documentation.
Yes, there'll be a lot of detail on the 106.
Thank you.
Councillor Atkinson.
I just want to say, because I didn't say it, I listen very carefully.
Sorry?
I listened very carefully, and I'm satisfied that all objections that have been raised by speakers have been dealt with either in the report or in subsequent answers given by the officers, and that I do support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ross, are you coming back? Third time?
Yeah, just another point of clarification. Do I need to move an amendment for my suggestion about condition 16 or not?
Okay, right. No is the short answer. Okay, what will happen is we will have a vote based on the recommendation before us. Only if that vote falls can I ask you to come up with potential alterations to that motion, which will then move into a substantive, and then we'll move again. They can. Yeah. So after I've got to propose the motion first before you can amend it. Yeah. And then we'll have a separate debate on that amendment, and there isn't one at the moment, Councillor. We're just talking about procedure.
I'm unclear, sorry. Sorry, Paul, I'm unclear, Chair, I'm unclear on the procedure. We're voting for the scheme or not? And is it only if the scheme's turned down that we're having recommendations? That seems a little unusual.
Just let legal make it quite clear, okay?
So the chair will make, the proposal will be seconded. It's at that point members will be available to then propose an amendment to that recommendation, to that motion. So, and if that will have to be seconded and then debated separately. Once we get to that point, if that's approved, then we get back to the original recommendation as amended. So that's how we get to that point. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that I am proposing I'm proposing the recommendation. The recommendation has been seconded by Councillor Atkinson. I'm now listening to Councillor Ralston.
I'd like to move an amendment, which is that we agree with the recommendation, but ask for an additional line to be put in condition 16, which is the construction method statement, which specifically relates to Gabriel Wharf access during the construction process. Anybody going to second that?
Right.
Can we clarify the wording?
First of all, can we have the exact wording that you are suggesting?
Can I suggest? I think condition 16 is pretty exhaustive in terms of the things it controls during construction, and if the reason at the end was added to, so it says in the interests of ensuring access to Gabriel's Wharf.
Yes, I'd be happy with that.
Okay, so that is the proposal. The exact wording again. Sorry, I was
to add to the reason for the condition to say in the interests of ensuring access during construction to Gabriel's Wharf.
Okay, so that's the proposal for an amendment to condition 16. Do I have a seconder? So I see Councillor Miller-Bone, which is right in front of me. Yeah. Do we actually require any debate on this? I think it's just we move to the vote. In that case, I'm calling for an indicative vote of hands. Please, are those in favour of the amendment? Yes, that is unanimous. Sorry, I was counting as well. Okay, so now we have an amended motion. Now I'm listening to Councillor Ketchin.
I'd like to push for a recommendation, or I don't know if it's an amendment, that at the southern end of the development there is no, or we can work on the wording in a second, but the principle of it is to avoid overshadowing of the canal, which sort of brings in the concerns about heights in that area and the concerns about nature.
Basically, that is effectively changing the application, and I don't think I can accept that amendment into the motion because it will fundamentally change the developer's application as presented to us. Okay, so I am accepting that offer of a motion. I'm asking for a seconder for it, please.
So do we want clarification on it a little bit, or are we? No?
I think first of all, I think they understand the principle of what you're asking for, Councillor Ketchin. Can you switch your microphone off, please? Thank you. I think we understand the principle of what Councillor Ketchin is asking for. So I'm asking, is there a seconder for this amendment? Councillor Bennett. Debate. Anybody wish to speak? Councillor Mitchell.
Question of clarification from the officers on this. The position is that it is claimed, alleged, whatever word you want to use to avoid legal problems, that the height of the buildings at this particular site will cause issues for the biodiversity nature of the canal. Right? Can I clarify from the officers in the SPD what is proposed is in line with what is in the SPD, and did the SPD have anything to say in particular about the impact on the biodiversity of the canal.
So the concern was raised with officers that overshadowing from these buildings, as shown in the shadow diagrams with the application, would cause an issue of biodiversity in the canal. So we put that to our ecological consultant. They pointed out, no, there is some overshadowing. It is a limited part of the day, it's limited times of the year, and over a very limited part of the canal. And there is no material impact on the biodiversity of the canal from the overshadowing from the buildings proposed.
Something the Environment Agency wouldn't comment on, or
not a matter for the Environment Agency. We as the planning authority took ecological advice on that point.
Councillor Ketch.
I think on the basis of that, about having a debate, I'd like to withdraw the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bennett, are you happy with that? And right, okay. Right, so we're now back to our original composite motion. Any other contributions as amended? So no, right. So I'm now putting to the vote the motion as amended with that change in condition 16. I'm asking for, first of all, an indicative vote. Those in favour of accepting the officer's recommendation as. All right. As that's unanimous, I don't need to ask for against or abstentions. We have finished this item on the agenda. However, you're not home yet. Okay, members, agenda item 6. You have received from the director a report relating to the delegated decisions and planning report acronyms. So, does anybody have any comments or questions relating to that report? I don't see any questions. In that case, I am asking for a clear show of hands for those in favour of noting this report. Yes, just ask to note the report. Those in favour of noting the report? Unanimous, thank you. All right, what have we got now? Agenda item 7. Okay, so now we've got the appeals report. Again, you've had an opportunity to look at this appeals report. And does anybody have any comments or questions relating to the appeals report? I'm not seeing any hands. So in that case, the recommendation is that members are asked to note the report. I'm asking for a vote, please, to note the report.
Unanimous again, Chair.
That's unanimous. Right. Okay, we're now moving into the date of next meeting. Yep. So the next meeting of this committee is on Monday, the 17th of February at 2025, 5:30 here in the Civic Centre. I will remind members that you should have received an email invitation to attend a training session on the 3rd. I would really like you all to attend that. I think it's going to be crucial. Give us an opportunity, having grown together over these months, to perhaps really try out some. Yeah, well, I think it's grown and grown. Thank you all very much indeed for your attention. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.